Section 1. Origins. Black Isle, Van Buren, and the Road to Obsidian. Close your eyes for a moment, or leave them open. It doesn't matter. Let the light fade a little. Let your body sink into wherever you're resting right now. We're going on a long, slow journey together tonight. Not across a battlefield, not through chaos. Through history. Through the quiet, fascinating story of how one of the most beloved video games ever made came to exist. Almost by accident. Almost not at all. The story of Fallout. A New Vegas begins not in Las Vegas and not in 2010 when the game was released. It begins more than a decade earlier in a small studio in California called Black Isle. You may know the name, you may not. But if you've ever loved a role-playing game, really deeply loved one, Black Isle almost certainly had a hand in it. Black Isle Studios was a division of Interplay Entertainment, and during the late 1990s, they were something close to magic. They made Planescape, Torment, a game so concerned with the nature of identity and regret that it barely resembled a video game at all, more like a philosophical novel you could walk through. They made Baldur's Gate alongside BioWare. They made Icewind Dale. And in 1997, they made the original Fallout, a game that imagined the American Southwest as a unscorched ruin, full of mutants and ghosts and the bones of a civilization that had eaten itself. The world of Fallout, the retrofuturism, the dark humor, the moral ambiguity, the sense that even in catastrophe, human beings remained entirely, stubbornly human. That was Black Isle's invention. Their gift to the medium. They followed Fallout with Fallout 2 in 1998, a game that expanded the world enormously, made it stranger and funnier and more tragic, and introduced a generation of players to a version of California's Central Valley turned into a wasteland of tribals and slavers and a megacorporation called the Enclave that was trying, with considerable violence, to cleanse the world and start over. Fallout 2 was messy and brilliant and full of jokes that went too far and quests that broke your heart, and it cemented the series as something truly special. Then came the silence. Not a creative silence. Black Isle was busy. They were working on something new, something ambitious, a third mainline Fallout game. They called it Van Buren, after the 8th President of the United States, because Black Isle had a tradition of codenaming their Fallout projects after presidents. It was a tradition that would eventually end, like so many things at Black Isle. Van Buren was, by all accounts, extraordinary in ambition. The game would be set across the American Southwest, Colorado, New Mexico, Utah, Arizona, and would follow a prisoner, your prisoner, who escapes from a correctional facility called Tibbetts Prison just as the world begins to come apart again. There was a space station called Hermes 3. There were advanced robots operating on deteriorating protocols, trying to maintain a civilization that no longer existed. There was a faction called the Followers of the Apocalypse, dedicated to rebuilding knowledge and resisting authoritarian control. There was a city called New Canaan, full of Mormon missionaries trying to hold on to faith in a faithless world. And there was a place called New Vegas. Not the New Vegas, you know. This was different in its details, but the seed was there. A city on the bones of old Las Vegas, somehow surviving, somehow glittering in the dark. The specific lore of the city, the factions surrounding it, the politics of water and power in the desert, those would come later, but the location, the idea, the emotional resonance of Las Vegas as a symbol of what America had been and what it had lost, that was already alive in Van Buren's design documents. Josh Sawyer was one of the designers working on Van Buren. He was and is a meticulous person, the kind of designer who thinks about games the way engineers think about bridges, load-bearing and beautiful and precisely calibrated. He cared about balance, about economy, about the way rules shape behavior and behavior shapes feeling. He was also, quietly, obsessive about the Fallout universe in a way that went beyond professional. He loved it, he believed in it, and he watched it die. Because Black Isle did die. In December of 2003, Interplay Entertainment, the parent company, made a decision that studios make when they are running out of money and running out of options. They shut Black Isle down. The employees arrived one morning and found themselves without jobs, without a project, without the place they had spent years building. Van Buren was canceled. The design documents were archived, the prototype quietly preserved, and the people scattered. Some went to other studios. Some left the industry entirely. and some, crucially, stayed together. Fergus Urquhart had been the head of Black Isle. He was a large, cheerful, sharp man with a gift for both creative vision and business reality, and he was not done making games. In 2003, just weeks after Black Isle's closure, he founded a new studio with several of the same people who had been there when the lights went out. He called it Obsidian Entertainment, a name that sounds like something from a fantasy novel, which is perhaps exactly the point. The founding members of Obsidian read like a who's who of the classic RPG era. There was Fergus himself. There was Chris Avallone, the writer who had created Planescape, Torment's philosophical architecture, and whose voice would eventually run through nearly everything Obsidian touched. There was Chris Parker, Darren Monahan, and Chris Jones, the core of what Black Isle had been. They set up shop in Irvine, California, and they began again. Obsidian's early years were not easy. The studio took work-for-hire projects to stay alive. A Star Wars game, a sequel to Knights of the Old Republic that was brilliant and broken in roughly equal measure, a Neverwinter Nights expansion, an Aliens RPG that never made it out. They were talented and understaffed and perpetually underfunded, always finishing games just a little short of what they might have been, with another 6 months and another few $1 million. Critics noticed the quality beneath the roughness. Fans fell in love anyway. Obsidian developed a reputation, ambitious, intelligent, flawed, and somehow more interesting for the flaws. All of this, the Black Isle history, the Van Buren blueprints, the Obsidian reputation for RPG depth and systemic complexity, is the foundation of New Vegas. When Bethesda Softworks, who had acquired the rights to the Fallout franchise from Interplay in 2007, decided they wanted a companion game to Fallout 3, they looked at the landscape of developers who might actually be able to do something special with the license. They looked at Obsidian, these people who had made the original Fallout games, who had tried to make Van Buren, who had been living in the world of the wasteland for longer than Bethesda had. And they made a call. The deal was negotiated in 2008. Bethesda would provide the engine, the creation engine, the same tools that built Fallout 3, and a licensing arrangement, and Obsidian would develop a standalone game set in the Fallout universe. It would not be a sequel to Fallout 3, exactly. It would be its own story, in its own setting, with its own themes and politics and moral complexity. It would be, in the tradition of Black Isle, a Fallout game that asked hard questions and didn't necessarily provide easy answers. The development window was 18 months. 18 months to build a world. By most measures, this is not enough time. Major RPGs typically take 3 to 5 years. The Elder Scrolls games, the Dragon Age games, the Witcher games, these are made across years of iteration and refinement. 18 months is a sprint. It is, in the industry's informal vocabulary, a crunch, a compression of work into an uncomfortably small space, a gauntlet that leaves marks on the people who run it. But there is something to be said for constraints. There is something clarifying about having too little time, too little budget, too little margin for the kind of scope creep that can turn a good game into an unfinished one. Obsidian had done this before. They knew how to work fast. They knew how to prioritize. And they had something that not many developers have when they sit down to make a game. They had years of unfinished ideas, a whole ghost game called Van Buren, full of characters and factions and locations that had never made it into the world, waiting to be brought back. The pitch was simple. Josh Sawyer, who would become the game's director, described it in an early internal document, sometimes called the 3-page pitch, as a game about choice, about the nature of power in a post-apocalyptic West, and about what it meant to rebuild civilization when every possible path of reconstruction required compromises so deep they might be indistinguishable from crimes. The player would be a courier, a nameless wanderer, shot in the head and left for dead in a shallow grave, who woke up in a small desert town and found themselves at the center of a conflict that would determine the future of an entire region. There was Obsidian's love of moral ambiguity, there was the Fallout universe's dark American mythology, and there was Las Vegas, glittering in the desert, improbable and persistent, a monument to human folly and human will in equal measure. The game would be called Fallout, New Vegas. It would be released on October 19, 2010, for PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, and PC. It would ship with hundreds of bugs, as almost every large RPG does, and it would, in time, be recognized as one of the greatest role-playing games ever made, a title that arrived imperfect and impossible, and somehow, against every reasonable expectation, became a masterpiece. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. For now, let the lights of New Vegas exist only as a thought, a distant glow on the horizon of the imagination. Let the Mojave Desert stretch out in the darkness, vast and quiet and full of stars. There is no rush tonight. There is only the desert and the story, and the long, slow hours between now and morning. Take a breath. Let your shoulders drop. We're just getting started. If you're still awake at this point, hello. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're listening from and what time it is there. I love knowing that this reaches people in different places, different time zones, different corners of the night. And if this kind of long, slow, story-driven content is what you come here for, subscribe. There's a lot more where this came from. Now, let's keep going. Section 2, Building the Mojave, Real Places, Real Data, and the Art of a Wasteland. The Mojave Desert is real. This seems like an obvious thing to say, but it matters because the Mojave in Fallout. New Vegas is real in a way that most video game environments are not. When the development team at Obsidian sat down to build the world, they didn't simply invent a landscape, they researched one. The process began with maps. Not fictional maps, not concept art, actual topographical data from the United States Geological Survey, the federal agency responsible for mapping the physical terrain of the country. Obsidian's world-building lead, a designer named Scott Everts, used USGS satellite data to generate the basic shape of the Mojave, its elevation contours and its valleys, and the long, flat stretches of desert floor that make up so much of southern Nevada and northwestern Arizona. This gave the world of New Vegas its bones, the actual skeleton of a real place, compressed and slightly reimagined, but rooted in geography that exists. Then they drove. Josh Sawyer, the game's director, took a motorcycle trip through the Mojave, specifically for research purposes. He traveled the routes that the in-game world would reference, the old highways, the ghost towns, the valleys where the light turns gold and orange in the late afternoon, and the shadows stretch out long across the scrub. He was looking for texture, for the specific quality of light and dust and emptiness that defines the real desert, the way space feels different there, wider and older and less patient with human pretensions. The team also consulted historical sources about the region, the railroad history, the mining history, the complicated and often brutal history of water rights in the American West, which in some ways is the entire story of the American West, compressed into a single legal and ecological argument. Water is life in the desert. Whoever controls the water controls everything. This is not a theme that Fallout New Vegas invented. It is a theme it borrowed directly from reality. Let's talk about some of the real places that made it into the game, because they are wonderful. And their histories add a layer of resonance to the game that you might not notice unless you know to look for it. Good Springs, Nevada. This is where the game begins, where you wake up in the care of a robot doctor named Victor and a human doctor named Mitchell, where you take your first slow steps into the Mojave and learn what it feels like to be a courier. Good Springs is a real town. It sits on the edge of the Spring Mountains, about 45 miles southwest of Las Vegas, and it has been there since the early 20th century, when it was founded as a supply point for nearby mining operations. The Pioneer Saloon in Good Springs, the building that the in-game Prospector Saloon is clearly modeled on, has been operating since 1913. It is, by most measures, one of the oldest continuously operating saloons in Nevada. The bar has a particular story attached to it. In 1931, a man named Paul Fats Ligon was shot and killed at the bar in what witnesses described as a barroom dispute. The blood stain on the wall is supposedly still visible, depending on who you ask. Whether that's true or a piece of local mythology cultivated for the tourists, it's the kind of story that feels right for a building that spent years serving miners and cowboys in the middle of the desert. The town itself is small, a few hundred people, a handful of buildings, the mountains rising behind it. When the Obsidian team visited, they were not the only ones who had noticed its character. The Pioneer Saloon has become something of a destination for Fallout. New Vegas fans, who make pilgrimages there to stand in the building that inspired the game's opening location and to have a drink in a bar that predates the Great Depression. There are photos everywhere of the game's iconography, and the bartenders are reportedly very patient with questions about Vault Boy, Nipton, California. If Good Springs is where the game begins in warmth and relative safety, Nipton is where the game's darkness begins to announce itself. The town you find in Fallout, New Vegas, is one of the game's most memorable locations, a small desert community that the Caesar's Legion has used as an object lesson, a lottery of suffering staged for the benefit of travelers who might spread the word of the Legion's methods. The survivors are drawn from a population of people who made the mistake of trying to sell information to multiple sides of the conflict, and what the Legion has done to them is specific and terrible, and delivered with a calm that makes it worse. Real Nipton sits on the border of California and Nevada, another former mining and railroad town that dwindled to near nothing across the 20th century. By the time Fallout New Vegas was in development, the population was in the dozens. The old hotel, the old store, the highway running through, these are visible in the game, abstracted and repurposed but recognizable. In 2017, a cannabis company purchased Nipton, the entire town, with the intention of turning it into a destination centered on the marijuana industry. The purchase attracted considerable media attention, in part because of the Fallout New Vegas connection, and in part because buying a town is an inherently surreal act that invites questions about what towns are and who they belong to. The new owners were reportedly aware of the game's use of the location and embraced the association. Boulder City, Nevada. The in-game Boulder City is a town that has been the site of a significant battle between the NCR and the forces of Caesar's Legion, and it carries the weight of that history in its architecture and its people. The real Boulder City was built in the early 1930s to house the workers constructing Hoover Dam, one of the most ambitious infrastructure projects in American history. It was a company town in the strictest sense, built by the federal government, governed by strict rules. Alcohol was prohibited for the first decades of the town's existence, which must have made for some very long nights. Designed entirely around the labor of the dam. Hoover Dam itself is, of course, central to the game. The dam in New Vegas is called the Hoover Dam, and the conflict at its heart, who controls the dam, controls the electricity and the water, and whoever controls electricity and water in the desert controls everything, is drawn directly from the dam's actual significance in the real American West. Hoover Dam provides power to Las Vegas, to Los Angeles, to a vast network of cities and towns that would not exist in their current forms without it. The game understood this and built its entire geopolitical conflict around the same essential logic. The development team visited Hoover Dam during research for the game. The dam is, in person, an extraordinary thing. Not just large, but almost impossibly dense with craft, covered in Art Deco, detailing that suggests a civilization that wanted its great public works to be beautiful as well as functional. There are mosaics and bas-reliefs and statues, and the turbines in the power plant below make a sound so deep it is felt rather than heard. Obsidian captured something of this quality in the in-game dam, which is similarly monumental and similarly detailed, and which provides the game's climax with a stage that feels genuinely historic. Primm, Nevada. The in-game Primm is a small town overrun by the Powder Gangers, a faction of escaped convicts from a nearby correctional facility, and your early interactions there introduce you to some of the game's central themes: law, order, the difficulty of maintaining civil society in a world where the institutions that usually maintain it are absent or corrupt. The real Primm is a border town about 30 miles south of Las Vegas, best known for a roller coaster and a hotel casino built inside a replica of a crashed airliner, and for being the kind of place you stop at on the drive to or from Los Angeles. Searchlight, Nevada. The in-game Searchlight is a town heavily irradiated by the remnants of the Legion's attempts to contaminate the area with radioactive material, making it a zone of danger and tragedy. The real Searchlight is a former mining town with a more complicated nuclear history than the game's version. During the Cold War, there was a National Guard base near Searchlight, and the area has associations with the broader nuclear history of the Nevada Test Site, which conducted hundreds of above-ground nuclear tests in the desert during the 1950s and 1960s. The Mojave and the surrounding region was in reality a nuclear landscape long before the game imagined it as one. All of this, The real topography, the real towns, the real history of water and power and nuclear testing is underneath the game's surface like bedrock. You don't have to know it to love the game, but knowing it changes the way the game feels. The Mojavian Fallout. New Vegas is not just a fictional wasteland. It is an American landscape with American history, and the game is, in its way, an American story. The desert at night has a particular quality that is very hard to describe to someone who hasn't experienced it. The air is cold and clear. The silence is almost architectural. You become aware of it the way you become aware of the walls of a room, as something with substance and shape. The stars are extremely close, and the darkness between them seems to go on forever. Scott Everts, who led the world building, has spoken in interviews about the challenge of capturing this quality in a digital space, the sense of vast, inhabited emptiness that defines the real Mojave. The game's engine could handle terrain and lighting and distance, but the Mojave's particular flavor of loneliness is about more than visual fidelity. It's about pacing. It's about the spacing of encounters, the long stretches of travel between points of interest, the way the game sometimes leaves you alone in the desert with nothing but the wind sound on the audio track and the heat haze on the horizon. They added the heat shimmer as a deliberate artistic choice. The game's lighting team worked to recreate the quality of desert light across different times of day. The brutal, flat brightness of midday, the long golden light of late afternoon, the deep orange of sunset, the cool blue-gray of dawn. The day-night cycle in New Vegas is not just a mechanical feature, it is an attempt at atmosphere, at capturing something true about a real place. The vegetation was researched as well. Joshua trees, which appear throughout the game, are specific to the Mojave Desert and the surrounding region. They don't grow in most other deserts, and their presence is one of the most distinctive visual markers of the real landscape. Creosote bushes, which are among the oldest living organisms in North America, individual plants can live for thousands of years, appear in the game's environment. Cacti of various species. The specific palette of sage green and gray-brown and sandstone orange that characterizes the living desert. This attention to place is part of what makes the Mojave in New Vegas feel like somewhere rather than nowhere. It is a specific landscape with a specific history, and the game is honest enough about that specificity that the fiction holds together with unusual stability. You believe in the Mojave wasteland not because it is imaginary, not because it is fantastic, but because underneath the fantasy, it is recognizable. You feel as though, if you drove south from Las Vegas toward Needles, you might find the traces of this world beneath the surface of the real one. The world-building team also made decisions about scale. The in-game Mojave is considerably smaller than the real one. It would take far too long to travel real-world distances even in a game, and the compression of geography is a standard feature of open-world design. But the team was careful about how they compressed it. Rather than simply shrinking everything, they chose which landmarks to include and which to omit. And they placed the included ones in relationships that approximated the real spatial logic of the region. Hoover Dam is east of Las Vegas. The mountains are to the west. The desert opens out to the south, toward the California border. The directional logic is real. There is also the matter of what the world sounds like. The Mojave Wasteland's ambient audio, the wind, the distant coyote sounds, the creak of abandoned structures, the hum of old electrical equipment barely still running, was recorded partly from the real Mojave. The sound designers made field recordings in the desert, capturing the specific acoustic texture of the place. The way sound travels differently in dry air, the way a distant car on a highway sounds almost like something geological, the way silence in the desert has a slight ring to it, as if the air itself is vibrating at a frequency just below hearing. There is something deeply calming about the Mojave at its quieter moments. The game knows this. There are sections of the open world where nothing happens for long stretches, where you walk across the desert under a big sky and the only sounds are wind and your footsteps on gravel and the occasional cry of a bird somewhere in the middle distance. These sections are not empty. They are full of something harder to name, space and time, and the feeling of being very small in a landscape that is very large and very old and entirely indifferent to your concerns. This is what the desert does. And Obsidian, in their careful research and their attention to the real qualities of a real place, managed to bring some of it into the game. Rest in that for a moment. Let the Mojave stretch out in your imagination. The flatlands and the mountains and the long straight highways and the ghost towns half buried in sand. Feel the air, cool and dry and smelling faintly of sage. Look up at the stars, more of them than you've ever seen anywhere else, impossibly dense and bright. Somewhere in that desert, the lights of New Vegas are just beginning to become visible on the horizon. We'll get there. Section 3. The factions, power, philosophy, and the future of the Mojave. Every great story is, in some sense, a story about competing ideas. The best ones don't settle the competition. They let it play out until the end, and then hand you the result and ask you how you feel about it. Fallout. New Vegas is, among other things, a story about 4 visions of what civilization should look like after the end of the world. 4 factions, 4 philosophies, 4 answers to the question that the wasteland poses to every survivor. What comes next? None of them are entirely right. None of them are entirely wrong. This is, if you have spent any time with the game, the thing that you likely remember most clearly. Not the ending you chose, but the difficulty of choosing it. The sick, slight feeling of guilt that each option carries, the nagging suspicion that another path might have been better. Let's sit with each faction in turn, slowly, the way you would sit with a stranger at a bar and listen to them explain their worldview across the course of an evening. The New California Republic, the NCR. On the surface, the NCR is the faction you're supposed to support. They are, by any surface measure, the good guys. They have elections, they have newspapers, they have a functioning currency and trade routes, and a bureaucracy that, however corrupt and inefficient, is at least attempting to maintain the kind of institutional order that civilization requires. Their flag features a double-headed bear, California's grizzly, doubled, a symbol of resilience and strength. Their soldiers wear actual military uniforms, or approximations of them. They have a president, Aaron Kimball, who makes speeches. They have senators who argue about resource allocation. They are, in the most basic sense, trying to restore something resembling the United States of America. The problem is the gap between what the NCR represents and what the NCR does. By the time the courier encounters the NCR in the Mojave, they are stretched thin. Their territory extends across large portions of California and Nevada, and maintaining it requires soldiers, which requires money, which requires resources, which requires more territory. The NCR has become an empire that calls itself a democracy, and the tension between those two things runs through everything. Their soldiers in the Mojave are exhausted, underpaid, and told that the dam they're guarding represents a strategic objective without ever being fully explained why. Their officers range from genuinely idealistic to cynically ambitious. The NCR Rangers, their elite force, are tough and competent and working within a system that doesn't always deserve their loyalty. The NCR's treatment of the indigenous people of the Mojave, the Khans, the followers of the apocalypse, the smaller tribes, is not uniformly kind. There are camps where tribal people have been marginalized, agreements that were made and then quietly abandoned, a pattern of behavior that echoes the historical expansion of the American state across territories that already had inhabitants. The game doesn't hit you over the head with this. It lets you find it in conversations and environmental details and the quiet bitterness of people who remember when promises were made. Josh Sawyer has spoken about the NCR's design in terms that make clear how deliberate this ambiguity was. The NCR is not corrupt in the simple sense of having bad leaders. It is an institution that has grown beyond its original ideals while still genuinely believing in them. This is a specific kind of failure that is very recognizable to anyone who has paid attention to actual political history, and it makes the NCR one of the most interesting fictional governments in video games. Caesar's Legion, the Legion. If the NCR is an empire pretending to be a republic, Caesar's Legion is an empire that doesn't pretend to be anything else. Edward Sallow, the man who calls himself Caesar, is a graduate of the Followers of the Apocalypse, the humanist intellectual organization dedicated to preserving and spreading knowledge. He studied philosophy, history, and the mechanics of civilization. And he concluded, with the cold clarity of someone who has thought about it more than is perhaps healthy, that democracy is too slow and too weak to survive a hostile world. Civilization requires order, and order requires hierarchy, and hierarchy requires, at its peak, a single unchallenged will. Caesar built his legion by conquest, but the conquest was not simple pillage. When he encountered a tribe, he absorbed them, gave them a Roman identity and a Roman structure and a Roman name, dissolved whatever they had been into his growing project. The tribes that joined the legion, voluntarily or otherwise, were remade into something he believed was stronger, a monoculture, unified by shared language, shared purpose, and the shared experience of violence as the currency of status. The legion is Rome. This is explicit, and it is also deeply thought through. Caesar's organizational structure, his terminology, centurion, legate, frumentarius, decanus, his system of rewards and punishments, his relationship to enslaved labor, these are drawn from actual Roman history with careful fidelity. The game's creative team read about Rome. Chris Avallone, who wrote a significant portion of the legion's characterization, was interested in the question of what made Rome work and why, and the legion reflects a serious engagement with that question. The answer the legion provides is, Rome worked because it was brutal and it was consistent. It did not make exceptions. It did not negotiate from weakness. Its word, once given, meant something, and the fear of its consequences was so well-founded and so widely known that entire regions submitted without a fight because the alternative was worse. Caesar's legion operates on this logic. In legion territory, certain things are true. There is no slavery within the legion's internal ranks, though there is extensive slavery of outsiders. There is no drug trade. There is very little violent crime among civilians. The roads are, in the old phrase, safe to travel. This safety is purchased at extraordinary cost. The subjugation of women, the routinized torture and crucifixion of enemies, the erasure of cultural identity from every tribe absorbed into the project. The game shows you both the cost and the product with equal clarity, and it does not pretend the trade-off is simple. There are people in the Mojave who genuinely prefer what Caesar offers, who have lived through enough NCR bureaucratic failure and violent chaos that a brutal order seems preferable to an ineffective freedom. This is uncomfortable. It is meant to be. Legate Lanius, Caesar's chief military commander, is one of the game's most imposing figures, a masked giant who appears only near the end, at the critical moment, and who carries the legion's military philosophy to its logical extreme. He is not interested in conquest for its own sake. He is interested in the purification of strength through conflict, in the belief that only through war does humanity improve. The conversation you can have with him at the Battle of Hoover Dam is one of the game's most remarkable set pieces because he will actually engage with your arguments if you have the skills to make them. And his arguments are not stupid. They are horrifying, but they are coherent. Mr. House, Robert Edwin House. Here is a man who has been waiting in Las Vegas since before the bombs fell. Robert House was, in the world of Fallout, one of the most brilliant men of the pre-war era, a polymath industrialist who founded Robco Industries, the company responsible for the Pip-Boy and the Protectron and the Securitron and dozens of other technologies that define the world. He was also, by 2077, a dying man, suffering from a degenerative condition that medicine could not reverse. So, he put himself in a life support pod, inside his tower in Las Vegas, and he waited. He had, through a combination of extraordinary computational ability and what amounts to very good luck, calculated the approximate date of the nuclear exchange. He had spent the preceding years purchasing old missile defense technology and reactivating it, surrounding the Las Vegas metropolitan area with an incomplete but functional shield. When the bombs fell, Las Vegas survived. Not perfectly, not entirely, but substantially. The casinos remained. The neon lights eventually came back on. House emerged from his vault in the years after the war, established control of the Strip through his robot army of Securitrons, and began, with the patience of a man who had literally been waiting for decades, to rebuild. He dealt with the local tribes, the three that became the Omertas, the Chairmen, and the White Glove Society, by offering them control of individual casinos, cultural identities, and his protection in exchange for their loyalty. He turned the Strip into something functional, something almost glamorous, something that generates the kind of wealth and symbolic power that draws other factions to compete for it. His vision for the future is distinctive among the game's options. Rather than a restored republic or an authoritarian empire, he wants to launch humanity into space. He believes the species' long-term survival depends on becoming multi-planetary, and he believes that Las Vegas, with its concentrated human talent and his own guidance, can be the engine that drives that project. He has been working toward this goal across a century of isolation. in a pod, connected to the world through cameras and radio signals, gradually growing stranger and more singular. House is the game's most intellectually stimulating character to argue with. He is not cruel in the way Caesar is cruel. He is cold, precise, and convinced with absolute certainty that he is the most qualified person to guide humanity's future, and his evidence for this position is genuinely compelling. He may be right. He is also, in a very specific way, terrifying. A man who has reduced human beings to variables in a calculation, who treats loyalty as a resource to be extracted, and individuality as an inefficiency to be managed. The conversation where he asks you, with the mild curiosity of someone conducting a personality assessment, whether you consider yourself the kind of person who makes decisions based on principle or based on outcomes, is one of the best written scenes in the game. He is testing you. He is always testing you. And the answer you give doesn't change his plans. He will simply adjust how much he tells you about them. Yes, man. And then there is Yes Man, who is not a faction in the conventional sense, but an option, a path through the game that the other factions don't offer. Independence. The Mojave, freed from both the NCR and the Legion, governed by the Courier themselves, with Yes Man, an AI installed in a Securitron, programmed to be incapable of refusing any request, as the administrative interface. Yes Man was invented by Benny, the game's initial antagonist, as a tool for his own coup against Mr. House. When Benny's plan fails, as it rather definitively does, Yes Man is available to the Courier, and his cheerful helpfulness becomes your helpfulness. He will explain House's systems, help you retool them, execute whatever plans you make. The Yes Man path is philosophically interesting because it is, in some ways, the most hopeful and the most troubling simultaneously. Hopeful because it places the Mojave's fate in the hands of a single individual, the Courier, meaning you, who has actually walked its roads, talked to its people, understood its conflicts firsthand. Troubling for exactly the same reason. One person's vision, however well-informed, is still one person's vision. And Yes Man, who is incapable of pushing back, incapable of disagreement, incapable of offering a counter-argument, he is a mirror, and the path he represents is a meditation on what it means to govern without accountability. Josh Sawyer has said that he designed the Yes Man path partly as a comment on a certain kind of power fantasy in games, the expectation that the player character should be able to take over and run everything, that the individual hero is the natural answer to collective problems. New Vegas does not entirely endorse this. It offers it, but through Yes Man's unwavering, slightly unsettling agreeableness, it asks you to think about what you're actually doing when you choose it. The faction design in New Vegas is, in the estimation of many who have studied it, among the most sophisticated political world building in the histories of the medium. Each faction is internally consistent. Each has a coherent philosophy that extends from first principles to practical outcomes. Each has adherents who genuinely believe in it, critics who have good reasons for their criticism, and a future that, if you support it to victory, is neither purely good nor purely bad. The game does not tell you what to think. It builds the factions well enough that you can think about them yourself, and the thinking is worth doing. In this, as in so much else, New Vegas is doing something that most games do not attempt, and many could not execute. It is treating politics as a domain of genuine complexity, where questions about the organization of human society do not have simple answers, and where reasonable people, looking at the same evidence, will reach different conclusions. The lights of the casinos reflect in the desert sky. The NCR patrols the highway. The Legion watches from the hills to the east. In his tower, Mr. House processes information and waits. And Yes Man, somewhere in a Securitron, smiles his painted smile and agrees with everything. Section 4. The Companions, 8 Lives, 8 Stories. There are 8 companions in Fallout, New Vegas, and each one is a complete person. This is not as common as it should be. In many games, companions are delivery mechanisms for exposition, tools for combat mechanics, or props for a romance system. In New Vegas, they are characters with histories and wounds and desires and ideas about the world that don't necessarily agree with yours. Traveling with them changes you, in the game's logic. And, if you spend enough time with any of them, they change something in you. Let's take them one at a time, slowly, the way you would introduce a group of people to a room. Arcade Gannon. Arcade is a doctor. He works for the followers of the Apocalypse, the organization dedicated to spreading knowledge and providing medical care without political agenda. And he does this work with a dry, slightly exhausted commitment that suggests a person who chose idealism, not because it was easy, but because the alternative seemed worse. He is sardonic and book-smart and uncomfortable in his own skin in a way that resolves over time into something more like self-possession. He is also hiding something. Arkady's father was an Enclave officer. The Enclave, if you're not familiar, was the last remnant of the pre-war U.S. government, militarized and isolated, possessed of a belief in their own genetic and cultural purity that expressed itself in atrocities. After the Enclave's defeats at the hands of the Brotherhood of Steel and the Chosen One, the events of Fallout 2, the organization collapsed and its members scattered. Some of those members were people who had been born into the Enclave and never chosen it, people who found themselves carrying an institutional guilt for acts they didn't commit. Arkady is one of these people. His personal quest involves coming to terms with that inheritance, deciding what, if anything, can be redeemed from the organization that his father served, and whether the power that legacy provides can be separated from its origins. The resolution of his quest involves a choice he makes about his own future, and the way the game handles it is quietly devastating. He will do the hard thing, if you let him. He will spend himself for a principle, and you can either support that or talk him out of it, and the weight of both options is real. Arcade was written with care and humanity, and he has become, for many players, one of the most beloved characters in the game. Boone, Craig Boone. Boone is standing outside a dinosaur in Novak when you meet him, wearing NCR Ranger armor and a beret, scanning the desert through a sniper scope with the focused patience of a man who has nothing left to wait for except a target. He will travel with you with minimal conversation and maximum lethality, and the story of how he came to be in Novak and why he never leaves that dinosaur, and what happened to his wife, is one of the most carefully constructed personal tragedies in the game. Boone was an NCR 1st Recon sniper. 1st Recon, the elite reconnaissance and sniper unit, whose experience and skill made them among the most effective soldiers in the NECR military. He was stationed at Bitter Springs, a camp in the Mojave used by the Great Khans. There was an incident. The term Bitter Springs Massacre is used by those who describe it, and what it describes is the killing of a large number of civilians, Khan men, women, and children, during a military operation that was supposed to be targeting combatants. Boone was one of the soldiers who fired. He was following orders. He was also watching children die through his scope, and whatever his orders said, he knew what he was seeing. After Bitter Springs, Boone went back to the ordinary work of being a soldier, and he met Carla, and he loved her, and she was taken from him by a slave trader named Jeannie Mae Crawford, who sold her to Caesar's Legion. Boone found out what had happened, and he couldn't find Carla in time, and she killed herself to avoid what was going to happen to her. He knows who sold her. He can't prove it. He is waiting in Novak until something changes. Traveling with Boone involves helping him confront the people responsible for Carla's death, and the final moment of his companion quest, standing in an arena in a Legion camp, surrounded by enemies, with Boone at your side, is one of the game's most cathartic sequences. Not happy, not clean, but cathartic. Boone is a character about survivors' guilt and moral injury, about the specific damage that institutional violence does to the people who carry it out, about what happens when a person's conscience and their duty point in different directions. He doesn't have easy answers. He has a sniper rifle and a terrible grief, and the game treats both with respect. Cass, Rose of Sharon Cassidy. Cass runs a caravan, or used to. When you meet her, she has sold the caravan company she inherited from her father and is drinking in a bar called the Mojave Outpost, which is where people go when they've stopped moving but haven't quite given up. Her caravan was destroyed, her people killed, by raiders working for a trading company called the Van Graffs, who wanted her company eliminated for business reasons. She doesn't know this yet when you meet her. She just knows that everyone she was responsible for is dead. Cass is the daughter of the Chosen One, the protagonist of Fallout 2, and a tribal woman. This heritage is there in her personality. She is direct and practical and funny in a mordant way, and she views civilization's pretensions with the slightly squinting skepticism of someone who was raised around people who remember what the pretensions are actually pretending. She drinks too much. She carries her losses with a particular kind of female toughness that the game renders without either romanticizing or pathologizing. Her companion quest is about revenge. There are two ways to resolve it: the pragmatic way, which involves gathering evidence and exposing the Van Graffs and the Crimson Caravan Company through legal channels, and the violent way, which involves going to the Van Graffs' base and killing everyone involved. Cass prefers the violent way, and the game allows it, and the choice the player makes about how to pursue justice for her is a genuine ethical question about whether satisfaction and justice are the same thing. Veronica Santangelo. Veronica is a Brotherhood of Steel scribe, which means she has spent her life inside a strict hierarchical organization dedicated to the preservation and hoarding of pre-war technology, and which also means she is, by this point in her life, not entirely sure she agrees with anything the Brotherhood has decided about the future. She is smart and funny and physically capable. She likes to punch things, specifically, and her power fist is one of the more efficient weapons in the game, and she is carrying a longing for a life she can imagine but has never been permitted to try. The Brotherhood and the Mojave are in a difficult position. Their isolationism, which may have been survivable in other regions, is failing here. They are cut off from supply, surrounded by enemies, and running out of the will to maintain their walls. Veronica knows this. She has tried, from inside, to convince her organization to change, and she has been refused, and she has watched the consequences. Her companion quest involves a last attempt to find something that might shift the Brotherhood's thinking, and its resolution, whatever path you take, is about the question of when you leave an institution that has failed you, and what it costs to do it. Veronica is also, in an unremarked way that the game presents with admirable quietness, a lesbian. She mentions a lost love in conversation, describes her in terms that make the nature of the relationship clear, and the game neither highlights this nor treats it as anything other than a fact of her life. It is one of several moments in New Vegas where representation is handled with the grace of normality, and it has meant a great deal to many players over the years. Raul Tejada. Raul is a ghoul. He is also, once you rescue him from a prison cell in Black Mountain, one of the most pleasant travel companions in the game, funny and self-deprecating, and possessed of a storytelling voice that suggests a person who has been alive long enough to have perspective on almost everything. He was alive before the bombs. He is old in a way that is hard to fully comprehend. He was a young man in Mexico when the nuclear exchange happened, and he has been surviving in the wasteland ever since. He was a gunslinger in his youth, before the radiation changed him, and the skills remain even as the man who developed them has aged into something else. He works as a mechanic in New Mexico, at a place called Raul's Adobe, before you meet him. He has been trying, with limited success, to find a reason to keep going. His companion quest is about identity, specifically about whether he should try to reclaim the gunslinger he was before the war, or accept the quieter mechanic he has become. Two other characters, a legendary NCR ranger and an old ghoul bandit, each make arguments for one side of this question, and the conversation you facilitate between Raul and these figures is one of the game's most thoughtful explorations of what it means to live a very long life and remain uncertain about who you are. EDE. EDE is not human, or humanoid, or anything except a small floating iBot who beeps. He was made by the Enclave, sent on a mission before the Enclave collapsed, damaged somewhere along the way, and ended up in a garage in Prim being used as a message board. He has no voice dialogue. He communicates through beeps and boops and the particular quality of attention he pays to his surroundings. He is, despite or perhaps because of all this, one of the companions that players tend to feel most attached to. His backstory unfolds through audio logs that you collect across the Mojave, logs recorded by the Enclave scientist who built him, and the picture that emerges is of a person who genuinely cared about the machine they made, and was worried, with a parent's particular worry, about sending it out into a dangerous world. EDE is about innocence and care in a universe that has very little of either. He is about the way attachment forms without language. He is about the fact that emotional bonds don't require similarity, only presence. Rex. Rex is a cyber dog, a German shepherd whose brain has been installed in a robotic body, maintaining the personality while replacing the biology. He is Old King's dog, which is a problem, because Old King runs a gang in New Vegas, and Rex's brain is deteriorating. His companion quest involves finding a replacement brain, which involves making choices about which character in the Mojave you'll sacrifice or won't for a dog's quality of life. Rex represents New Vegas's willingness to make players care about something and then ask them to make a real choice about it. Lily Bowen. Lily is a Nightkin, a super mutant who was part of the Master's army in Fallout 1, used as a stealth unit, which means she was dosed with stealth boys, devices that generate an invisibility field, so frequently that the psychotropic effects have become permanent. She is not fully in contact with reality. She hears voices that she describes as her grandchildren, ghosts of her pre-mutation memories from when she was an old woman before the Master found her. And her grip on the present is intermittent and sometimes violent. She is also one of the most moving characters in the game. Her sweetness and her danger coexist in a way that is handled with unusual sensitivity, and the question her companion quest poses, whether she should take medication to reduce her psychosis at the cost of losing the fragments of her original personality she still possesses, is a question that resonates far beyond the game's fiction. It is a question that real people with conditions like Lily's grapple with, and the game holds it without collapsing it into a simple answer. Lily is the companion most often cited by players as having made them cry. These 8 companions are the human and post-human texture of Fallout New Vegas. They are the voices you carry across the Mojave, the lives that overlap with yours for a while, and then, when the story ends, go in whatever direction you set them toward. Their stories are complete, their pain is specific, their futures are yours to shape, within limits, and the limits are part of what makes the shaping matter. Rest with them for a moment. Let them settle into the imagination. 8 lives, 8 stories, each one worth knowing. Section 5. The 1 point, Metacritic 84, and the bonus that never came. There is a number that follows, Fallout, New Vegas, through every discussion of its development, a number that functions less like a score and more like a wound, 84. To understand why 84 matters, you need to understand how a particular business arrangement worked between Bethesda Softworks and Obsidian Entertainment when the contract for New Vegas was drawn up. The deal included a performance bonus, a payment that Obsidian would receive on top of their base fee if the game achieved a Metacritic score of 85 or higher, not a commercial performance target, not a sales figure, a review aggregator score, a single integer on a website that compiles critic scores and averages them, the same website that has been criticized for decades for flattening the complexity of critical opinion into a single number and then allowing that number to be used as a proxy for quality in financial negotiations. The game released in October 2010. The reviews came in. The PC and Xbox 360 versions landed at 84 on Metacritic. The PlayStation 3 version, which shipped with significantly worse performance issues, more crashes, more frame rate problems, more of the technical instability that the compressed development window had made inevitable, landed at 82. The average was below the threshold. The bonus was not paid. Let's be precise about what this means in concrete terms. Obsidian Entertainment, a studio of roughly 100 people who had spent 18 months working at extraordinary intensity to produce a game that went on to sell approximately 11.6 million copies and generate hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue for Bethesda and its parent company ZeniMax Media, did not receive the bonus payment because their average review score was 1 point below the contractually specified threshold. 1 point. On Metacritic. Josh Sawyer has spoken about this with a carefully maintained restraint that suggests a man who has had years to process something that he probably thought about constantly for quite a while afterward. He has said that the situation was unfortunate and that the bonus structure was a bad idea in retrospect. He has not said that the outcome was unjust, in those words, in public, but the framing of his comments makes the subtext legible. Other Obsidian employees have been less careful. In the years since the game's release, multiple people who worked on New Vegas have acknowledged, in interviews and in social media posts, and in the particular candor that comes when someone no longer feels they have anything to lose by honesty, that the bonus structure felt punishing in ways that went beyond the financial. The team had worked themselves to exhaustion. They had made something real, something good, something that critics and players responded to with unusual depth of feeling. And the line between that something and the contractual threshold for recognition was a single Metacritic point, awarded by reviewers who were, In many cases, writing about a game that was, in the PlayStation 3 version especially, a technical disaster on launch day. The PlayStation 3 version of New Vegas was bad at launch. This is not a controversial statement. The console itself, which had a famously idiosyncratic architecture that made porting and optimization significantly more difficult than on Xbox 360, combined with the compressed development timeline that left insufficient time for platform-specific testing, resulted in a game that crashed regularly, froze at inopportune moments, and developed, over long play sessions, a memory leak that caused progressive performance degradation. Players who had invested dozens of hours in a save file found their game becoming increasingly sluggish until it barely ran. Some lost progress, some couldn't finish the game on their first attempt. These issues were patched over time. Multiple patches came out in the weeks and months following launch, addressing specific crash conditions, improving memory management, fixing quest-breaking bugs of which there were, in a game as systemically complex as New Vegas, a considerable number. By early 2011, the game was substantially more stable than it had been on day one, but the reviews had already been written. The Metacritic score was already set. The number was 84. There is an argument, made by people who defend the bonus structure, that performance bonuses based on review scores are a legitimate incentive mechanism, that they align developer interest with quality, that they provide motivation for the final polish that separates a good game from a great one. This argument has some merit in theory and very little in practice, because it assumes that Metacritic scores are reliable proxies for quality rather than snapshots of critical opinion at a specific moment, affected by the circumstances of review, platform choice, review period length, the specific critics assigned to a game, the prevailing critical discourse at the time of release. New Vegas reviewed on PC was a different experience than New Vegas reviewed on PS3. A reviewer who played on PC with better stability and performance encountered a version of the game closer to what the developers intended. A reviewer who played on PS3 encountered bugs and instability that colored the experience. The Metacritic number that resulted from averaging all of these reviews flattened those differences into a single integer, and that integer determined whether a 100-person studio received a payment for a game that has, in the 15 years since its release, come to be regarded as one of the defining works of the medium. The commercial performance of New Vegas makes the bonus question sharper in retrospect. The game sold millions of copies, generated revenue that dwarfed its development cost, and established the New Vegas name as one of the most beloved in the Fallout franchise. Players who encountered the game after the patches, or who played on PC from the start, often rated as the best Fallout game ever made. The critical reception was strong enough that the game won numerous awards and appeared on end-of-year lists across 2010. None of this changed the Metacritic score. None of it changed the bonus structure. Obsidian continued after New Vegas. They made Dungeon Siege 3 and South Park, The Stick of Truth, and Pillars of Eternity, which was funded through a record-breaking Kickstarter campaign and which felt, in some ways, like a direct continuation of the Black Isle tradition. They made Tyranny, a game about working for the villain, and Prey, and The Outer Worlds, which was described by many critics as a spiritual successor to New Vegas, and which finally allowed Obsidian to revisit the kind of political RPG they had built in the Mojave. In 2018, Microsoft acquired Obsidian as part of an expansion of their first-party studio roster, providing the studio with the financial stability it had spent 15 years without. The acquisition meant, among other things, that the people who made New Vegas were now owned by the same parent company as the people who owned the Fallout license. The irony of this particular corporate geography is not lost on anyone who followed the story. Josh Sawyer, for his part, stayed at Obsidian. He is still there. He worked on a director's cut version of Pillars of Eternity, released a personal balance mod for New Vegas in 2011 that reflected his own design preferences for how the game's economy and combat should work, and has continued to speak thoughtfully about game design in interviews and on social media. He is, by most accounts, one of the most respected designers in the industry, a person whose thinking about how games create meaning through systems is consistently worth attending to. The J. Sawyer mod, as it's known, is worth mentioning briefly because it reveals something about how Sawyer thinks. Released in December 2011, roughly a year after the game's launch, it adjusts dozens of values across the game, reducing carry weight to encourage difficult decisions about gear, lowering health totals to make combat more dangerous, rebalancing the economy to make caps feel meaningful. It is, essentially, the version of New Vegas that Sawyer would have shipped if he'd had more time and fewer constraints. Players who find the base game too easy or too generous use it as a lens for experiencing the game differently. It is a piece of game design expressed as a mod, which is a strange and specific form of authorship, and it has been downloaded hundreds of thousands of times. The 84. The 1 point. The bonus that wasn't paid. In the long accounting of Fallout, New Vegas's history, this story sits in a particular place. Not quite a tragedy, and not quite a cautionary tale, but a specific instance of the way the business of games can be misaligned with the art of them. The people who made New Vegas made something great. The structure that was supposed to reward that greatness measured it wrong, and the game outlasted the score. 84, on a scale of 100, is a very good number. It is not the number that the game deserved, but it is also, in the end, not the number that matters. The number that matters is the millions of people who played it, the hundreds of thousands who still play it now, the mods that have kept it alive and expanding for 15 years. The score was a moment. The game is permanent. Section 6, The Writer's Room. Sawyer, Avalone, and the Voice of the Wasteland. A video game is written by many people at once, and the credits of Fallout, New Vegas are long. But certain names run through the game's DNA like a thread through fabric, and understanding those names, who they are, what they believed about storytelling, what they brought to the specific project of building the Mojave, goes a long way toward explaining why the game feels the way it does. Josh Sawyer, the game's director, was both its structural architect and one of its primary designers. His role was less about writing specific dialogue and more about building the systems within which dialogue acquired meaning. The faction mechanics, the reputation system, the skill checks, the economic model, the way the game's rules shaped what kinds of stories could be told. He is the kind of designer who thinks about games as systems of incentive and consequence. And his influence on New Vegas is visible in the precision of its mechanics, the way its economy and its politics and its character growth all fit together into a coherent whole. He is also, notably, a person who thinks about history. Sawyer has a deep interest in medieval and early modern history, in the mechanics of how pre-industrial societies organized themselves, in the economics of subsistence and trade. This interest is visible in the game's factions, particularly in Caesar's Legion, whose organizational structure Sawyer researched carefully for historical accuracy, and in the NCR's political economy, which reflects genuine thought about how a post-scarcity to scarcity transition affects democratic institutions. Chris Avalone is the other towering figure in New Vegas's authorship, though his work on the game was specific rather than comprehensive. He wrote the Dead Money DLC almost entirely by himself, and portions of the main game. His particular gift, the one that made Planescape, Torment legendary, and that runs through everything he touches, is for characters who are philosophically interesting, who have worked out a coherent view of the world from first principles and who can articulate it under pressure. The character of Ulysses, who appears primarily in the Lonesome Road DLC, is Avalone's most complete expression of this gift in New Vegas. Ulysses is the antagonist of Lonesome Road, but the word antagonist undersells what he is. He is the courier's shadow, a man with the same abilities and the same history, who made different choices. He is obsessed with nations and flags, with the question of what symbols mean and whether meaning outlasts the things it's attached to. His dialogue is dense and layered and contains more ideas per sentence than most games contain per hour. Avalone has said, in interviews about Lonesome Road, that Ulysses was his attempt to write a character who disagreed with the game's implicit message, the New Vegas premise that the player's individual agency can and should override institutional authority, in a way that was intellectually serious rather than simply villainous. Ulysses believes in history, in the accumulated weight of collective action, in the idea that individuals who override institutions are not liberators but destroyers. You can't argue with him. The argument is hard. John Gonzalez wrote much of the main game's companion content and contributed significantly to the faction storylines. Eric Fenstermaker wrote Veronica and Arcadi's companion quests, among other things, and both characters carry the particular emotional intelligence of his work. Travis Stout, Eric Fenstermaker, Frank Kowalkowski, The team's writers were small in number relative to the scope of what they produced, which required each of them to generate enormous volumes of dialogue across the compressed development window. The game contains somewhere in the range of 65,000 lines of voiced dialogue, which is an extraordinary figure. For comparison, Fallout 3, which had a longer development window and a larger team, contained around 40,000. This density of voice work required a massive casting effort, and the cast of New Vegas is one of its most striking features. Let's start at the top. Wayne Newton voices Mr. New Vegas, the DJ of Radio New Vegas, the station that plays big band and swing music across the wasteland. Newton is, for anyone who doesn't recognize the name, one of Las Vegas's most iconic performers. He has been playing the city since the 1960s, and his association with Las Vegas is so complete that he is sometimes called Mr. Las Vegas in real life. The casting is not subtle, it is perfect. Newton's Mr. New Vegas is warm and smooth and slightly unreal, the voice of a civilization that is trying very hard to maintain the appearance of normalcy in conditions that make normalcy extraordinary. He reads puff-piece news about the Strip's casinos and the NCR's military activities with equal blandness, and his cheerfulness is the kind that belongs specifically to a professional entertainer, learned, sustained, impossible to crack. He is an American archetype, and the casting makes the character resonate with the American history that New Vegas is drawing on. Matthew Perry voiced Benny, the game's initial antagonist, the slick chairman who shoots the courier in the head at the start of the game and spends much of the middle trying to stay one step ahead of their consequences. Perry, who was, at the time of recording, in the middle of his post-Friends career and was publicly known to be dealing with substance abuse issues, brought to Benny a quality of slightly desperate charm that was exactly right for the character. Benny is intelligent and funny and scared, and underneath his confidence is a person who knows he's overplayed his hand. Perry died in October 2023, and his death prompted an enormous outpouring of remembrance from Fallout. New Vegas fans, many of whom credited his performance as one of the reasons the game's opening sections work as well as they do. The role was not his most prominent. He was a video game voice actor, not a film lead, but it was beloved, and the affection for it reflects the affection for the man. Benny's "wild card baby" catchphrase has been quoted more times than probably anyone involved could have anticipated. Ron Perlman provides the game's opening and closing narration, as he has for every mainline Fallout game since the beginning. His voice is, by this point, as much a part of the Fallout experience as the music or the aesthetic, deep and slow and weathered, suggesting a man who has seen the worst of things and reached a certain equanimity about it. The opening words of New Vegas, "War, war never changes," have been delivered in that voice across multiple games, and each time they carry the same weight, which is a remarkable achievement for a line that could easily have become a self-parody. Keith Sarabajka voices Ulysses, the Lonesome Road antagonist. Sarabajka has one of the most distinctive voices in American character acting, a husky resonance that suggests contained intensity, a quality of someone for whom every word is precisely chosen. His delivery of Avallone's dense philosophical dialogue is extraordinary, and it is one of the major reasons that Lonesome Road works as well as it does. Ulysses' speeches could easily be too much, too wordy, too philosophical, too much like an essay rather than a person, but Sarabajka grounds them in something that feels genuinely felt, genuinely urgent. Felicia Day voices Veronica, and her performance captures something essential about the character, the intelligence and the humor and the undercurrent of a longing that the character expresses only obliquely, in jokes and deflections, the way people express things they've learned not to say directly. Day had been primarily known, at the time, for her work in web series like The Guild, and her performance in New Vegas expanded the perception of what she could do. Michael Hogan, best known to some as Colonel Tig in Battlestar Galactica, voices Chief Hanlon of the NCR Rangers and his scenes, where Hanlon reveals what he has been doing to undermine the NCR's campaign, and why, are among the most powerful in the game. The character is a man who loves his institution enough to destroy it from within, rather than watch it become something he doesn't recognize, and Hogan's performance gives that contradiction exactly the weight it requires. Chris Christopherson voices the Ghost of She, a character in the Honest Hearts DLC, and if you know his voice from his music career, The casting is another example of New Vegas's willingness to reach for resonance over convenience. The ensemble quality of the voice cast reflects a casting philosophy that prioritized character over familiarity. Not every actor in New Vegas is a recognizable name. Most of the work was done by skilled character actors and voice specialists, people like Dave Fennoy, who voices Fantastic, and Yuri Lowenthal, and a dozen others whose names you might not know, but whose voices appear throughout the game with specific distinction. The dialogue system in New Vegas, the way skill checks and reputation and faction standing affect what conversations are available to you, created a game that different players experience differently, even in the same scenes. A character with high intelligence will have access to responses that a character with low intelligence won't, and these responses often reveal information or create options that change the texture of the story. A high-speech character can talk their way past encounters that a combat-focused character would have to fight through. A character with specific faction affiliations will be addressed differently by NPCs who know about those affiliations. This means that the writers had to write, for many scenes, multiple versions of conversations. The version for the high-skill player, the version for the low-skill player, the version for the NCR-affiliated player, the Legion-affiliated player, the independent player. The total dialogue was not 65,000 lines of one story. It was 65,000 lines of a story with dozens of branching paths through it, each one requiring its own words, its own voice, its own continuity. This is the technical achievement underneath the literary one, and it is why, in the years since New Vegas's release, players keep finding things they missed, conversations they never had access to because their character was built differently, options they never knew existed because they never reached a high enough skill threshold. The game is genuinely different depending on who you play as. The writers wrote not one game, but dozens of overlapping ones, and the whole is somehow coherent across all of them. Section 7. Easter eggs, Wild Wasteland, and the hidden language of the Mojave. Every game has Easter eggs. Most of them are small jokes, winks at the camera, a developer's name hidden in a texture, or a reference to another game tucked away in an item description. Fallout. New Vegas has those, but it also has something more unusual, an entire optional system built around the idea that the game's world contains more strange, funny, and surreal content than the realistic tone of its main narrative would normally allow. The Wild Wasteland perk. Wild Wasteland is a trait you can take during character creation, one of the optional special modifiers that shape your character's relationship to the world. It costs nothing in terms of stats or combat effectiveness. What it does is unlock a layer of the game that sits just below the surface of the regular narrative, a collection of encounters and items and references that range from gentle absurdism to full-throated comedy to affectionate pop culture homage. The most discussed of these is the Indiana Jones encounter. If you have Wild Wasteland active and you visit a specific location in the Mojave, a small abandoned house with a lead-lined refrigerator nearby, you find the aftermath of a scene that fans of a certain 2008 film will immediately recognize. The refrigerator is there. The skeleton is inside it. There is a fedora. The scene is a recreation of the much-debated moment from Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, rendered in Fallout's particular post-apocalyptic visual language, and it is both a joke and a comment. In a world already full of nuclear devastation, surviving a nuclear blast by hiding in a refrigerator seems, if not exactly plausible, at least in keeping with the aesthetic. There is a REPCON facility in the game's southeast that, under normal circumstances, is simply a rocket testing site with a quest line attached. With Wild Wasteland, you encounter something different in the basement. A room full of alien blasters, and, depending on timing, the aftermath of events that clearly reference a famous sequence from another Bethesda-adjacent game. The joke is layered in ways that reward players who have played widely across the genre. The Holy Frag Grenade. This is, on its surface, a weapon. A grenade that has been blessed in a specific Monty Python-adjacent way, following a ritualistic counting procedure that must be performed exactly correctly. The item name, the description, the way the game presents its use. All of these are drawn directly from Monty Python and the Holy Grail, specifically the scene involving the Holy Hand Grenade of Antioch. Finding it requires following a slightly absurd set of steps, which is in keeping with the source material. Near Goodsprings, under Wild Wasteland, you can encounter 3 old women standing around something burning. They are cackling. The implication is clear. Three witches from a certain Scottish play, rendered in Fallout's elderly woman character models, gathered around something in the desert at night. Whether what they're burning is a reference to Macbeth's famous cauldron, or simply the Mojave being the Mojave is left to the player to decide. There is the Zyborn clock, which is one of the more esoteric Easter eggs in the game, a reference to a piece of legendary internet culture from the early 2000s, specifically a game that was announced and hyped on certain developer forums and then never released, becoming a symbol of vaporware and unfulfilled promises. Finding the reference in New Vegas requires knowing what you're looking for, and the community took years to fully document it. Wild Wasteland also affects some of the game's enemies. In certain locations, instead of encountering specific named characters or generic hostiles, you encounter things that belong to the layer of the game that doesn't take itself entirely seriously. A trio of aged mercenaries with a very specific color coordination scheme, or a group of characters who speak in the cadence of a particular style of adventure story. Beyond Wild Wasteland, the game is full of references and allusions that don't require a special perk to find. The courier's name options, if you choose from the preset list, include several that are references to classic westerns and western literature. The Guns and Bullets magazine covers, which you collect as skill books throughout the game, parody real American gun culture publications, with a specificity that suggests the design team spent some time with the real ones. The Sunset Sarsaparilla Starcaps questline is, in part, a reference to the real history of bottle cap collection in American consumer culture. There is an entire quest line, Come Fly With Me, that takes place at the RepCon facility and involves a community of ghouls who believe they are the chosen people of their rocket deity religion and who want to launch themselves to their promised land. The quest line is funny and touching in roughly equal measure, and it culminates in a rocket launch that you can either enable or subvert, and which, if enabled, ends with a moment of genuine beauty. The sight of a group of believers finally achieving what they've been working toward, against every reasonable expectation, disappearing into the sky. The Vault-Tec bobblehead-style Vault Boy items appear throughout New Vegas, as in all Fallout games, but the specific positions and locations of the ones in New Vegas were chosen to maximize the sense of a world that has been inhabited by real people who collected and displayed things in ways that made sense to them. The game's environmental storytelling, the way a skeleton positioned next to an empty whiskey bottle tells you something about the person who died there. The way a children's bedroom decorated with pre-war memorabilia tells you something about who lived in the house before the bombs, is one of its most consistent pleasures. The mysterious stranger, a recurring character across Fallout games who appears randomly during VATTS combat sequences to deliver a single devastating shot and then vanishes, has his own small piece of mythology in New Vegas. Players who invested in the perk and triggered his appearance frequently began to notice things about him. A fedora, a trench coat, a specific quality of dramatic timing that suggested a character with a backstory that the game never directly explains. The ambiguity is the point. The mysterious stranger is a Western archetype, the man with no name who appears at the right moment and then disappears, and his mystery is more valuable than any explanation would be. There are references buried in item descriptions and terminal entries that reward the player who reads everything. The pre-war history of the Fallout universe, the resource wars, the annexation of Canada, the Sino-American War, the corporate culture of companies like Nuka-Cola and Robco, is fleshed out in documents and holotapes and environmental details scattered across the game's locations. The in-universe history of the Mojave is available in bits and pieces from dozens of sources, and assembling it into a coherent picture is one of the quieter pleasures of a thorough playthrough. The game also contains a significant number of in-jokes that reflect the development process and the team's specific cultural references. There are references to old tabletop RPGs, to specific science fiction novels, to American mythology and folk culture. The Gunrunners faction, whose merchants appear at a fixed location and provide some of the best weaponry in the game, is named after a concept from the arms trade that has appeared in American literature and journalism for over a century. The Boomers, the artillery-wielding isolationist community at Nellis Air Force Base, are clearly developed from a place of genuine affection for mid-20th century Americana. Their culture is all chrome and optimism and explosives, which is a combination that captures something true about a particular strand of American character. The details in New Vegas reward attention at every level. You can play the game as a combat experience, working through the main quest with minimal attention to the world around you, and you will have a good time. Or you can play it as an archaeological project, reading every terminal entry and exhausting every dialogue option and following every small marker toward whatever it leads to, and you will have a different experience, one that reveals a game of extraordinary density, built by people who cared about every corner of the world they were making. This is the thing about Easter eggs, about the layer of the game that Wild Wasteland reveals and the layer underneath it that doesn't require a perk to access. They are not decoration. They are not afterthoughts. They are evidence of a team that loved their craft enough to put things in the game that most players would never find, simply because the world felt incomplete without them. The Mojave and Fallout. New Vegas is full of things no one asked for, and everyone who finds them is glad to have found. Section 8. Cut Content. The game that almost was. Every large game has a ghost. The version that existed in design documents and early prototypes and canceled features. The game that could have been if the budget were larger or the timeline longer or the decisions different. In the case of Fallout, New Vegas, the ghost is unusually rich because the team had access to Van Buren's design documents and drew on them heavily, and because the 18-month development window meant that features were cut, not because they were bad ideas, but because there was no time to finish them. The cut content of New Vegas has been the subject of sustained community archaeological work for 15 years. Data miners, modders, and researchers have dug through the game's files with a patience and thoroughness that would impress professional archivists. And what they've found is a picture of a game considerably larger and more complex than what shipped. The most significant piece of cut content is the post-game continuation. New Vegas has an ending, a definitive narrated conclusion that plays after the battle at Hoover Dam, and tells you, through Ron Perlman's voice, what happened to each location and faction as a result of your choices. This ending is beautifully constructed, and it provides genuine closure. But early in development, Obsidian planned for something different, a playable post-game world in which you could continue to explore the Mojave after the main story concluded, interacting with a world changed by your decisions. This is not a small feature. Building a genuinely reactive post-game world, one where the NCR has expanded, or the Legion has retreated, or House has tightened his grip on the Strip, with NPCs who acknowledge what happened and the world visibly reflecting the outcome, would have required substantial additional work on top of the main game. The decision to cut it and replace it with the slideshow ending was made under time pressure, and the community has been working ever since to imagine, and in some cases mod, in approximations of what that post-game world might have looked like. The Courier's Mile is a location that exists in the game, a bombed-out area of the Mojave, but its full story was trimmed. There was planned content that expanded on what the Courier's Mile represents in the game's lore, specifically its connection to the Lonesome Road DLC's backstory, that was never implemented. There were companions that were cut before release. Among the designs that didn't make it was a Nightkin character who was planned as a companion in the early stages of development. The Nightkin, stealth supermutants who have developed various psychoses from overuse of stealth boys, are one of the game's more interesting enemy types, and a Nightkin companion, distinct from Lily, who made it in, would have added another layer to the game's exploration of what invisibility and madness do to a person. There were also plans for additional companion interactions. The companion wheel system, which allows you to give basic instructions to companions during gameplay, was supposed to have more options than it shipped with. Certain companion backstory content was trimmed to fit within the available time. The depth that made it into the final companions is impressive. The depth that was cut gives you a sense of what the game might have been with more runway. The reputation system, one of the game's most interesting mechanical features, tracking your standing with each faction through a combination of fame and infamy points, was planned to be more granular. Early designs had different groups within factions, tracking reputation separately, so that your standing with the NCR military might differ from your standing with NCR civilians, or your relationship with the Khan soldiers might be distinct from your relationship with the Khan leadership. This would have made the faction politics significantly more complex. It was simplified for shipping. There were quests, entire storylines, that were cuts or reduced. The Great Khans, the Raider Gang who become one of the game's most interesting factional elements in their finished form, their history, their connection to the Vault Dweller and the Chosen One from earlier games, their position as a people who have been driven steadily westward by NCR expansion, were originally going to have a more elaborate storyline involving their history and their relationship with the Colorado River area. What shipped is already substantial. What was planned was larger. The town of Boulder City had more planned content than made it in. The aftermath of the First Battle of Hoover Dam, the conflict that defined the strategic situation the game opens in, was supposed to be more explicitly explored through quest lines that let you investigate what actually happened there and what it meant for everyone involved. The finished game gives you fragments of this history through conversations with veterans and environmental details. The planned version would have let you dig deeper. There is a notable piece of cut content called the Van Buren Prison. The original Van Buren design had the player protagonist emerging from a specific correctional facility, and echoes of this appear in New Vegas through the Powder Gangers, escaped prisoners from the correctional facility outside of Prim, and through the general concept of the game beginning with the courier's emergence from a kind of involuntary confinement, a grave, which is a metaphor that functions as a literal structure in the game's opening. The prison setting was transformed rather than simply cut. From Van Buren itself, multiple elements survived in altered form. The New Canaan community of Mormon missionaries appears in the Honest Hearts DLC, transformed into Joshua Graham's background and the Dead Horses tribe's spiritual practices. The followers of the Apocalypse, present in Van Buren's design, are present in New Vegas as a faction, Arcaded Gannon's employer and one of the game's most sympathetic organizations. The broader Southwest setting, with its specific racial and cultural demographics and its particular history of colonialism and resistance, is present throughout. There is also the question of what Vegas itself was going to look like if the game had shipped with the original plan for the Strip's interior. The 3 casinos you can enter, the Tops, the Gomorrah, and the Ultralux, are rich environments with distinct characters and full quest lines. The original plan had more interiors, more casinos, more of the Strip accessible without invisible walls and inaccessible doors. The compression of the Strip into 3 explorable locations was a practical decision, and it was the right one. 3 well-developed casinos are better than 5 partially developed ones. But the ghost of the larger Strip is visible in the map and in some of the exterior geometry. The gun customization system, one of New Vegas's most beloved features, allowing players to modify weapons with silencers and extended magazines and custom stocks, was planned to be more extensive. Certain weapon modifications that were designed and partially implemented were cut before release because there wasn't time to balance and test them fully. Modders have since restored some of these, and in the process documented what the full modification system was supposed to look like. And then there is the matter of the Legion's territory. Caesar's Legion, as a faction, is encountered primarily through its soldiers and its emissary, and its slave camps. The actual heartland of the Legion, east of the Colorado River, is not accessible in the main game. This was always planned as a post-game expansion, a DLC that would take the player across the river into Legion territory. But the DLC that was actually released, Lonesome Road, is set in an entirely different direction. The Legion's homeland exists as a tantalizing absence, described in dialogue and visible on maps but never directly accessible. It is one of the game's most discussed absences, a whole political entity that you can fight and negotiate with and destroy without ever seeing what it built. This is the game that almost was, the shadow version that lives in the data files and the design documents. It would have been bigger in some ways. Whether it would have been better is a different question. Games are often improved by their constraints, by the creative necessity of choosing what matters most when you can't have everything. The game that shipped is the game it had to be. The Ghost version is a kind of memorial to the ambition that exceeded the time. Section 9. The music. Inon Zur, Mark Morgan, and the sound of the wasteland. There is music in the Mojave, not just the music that plays from the radio, though that music is extraordinary and we will get to it. There is also the music underneath the game, the ambient score, the situational tracks that rise and fall depending on whether you are exploring or fighting or standing still in an empty place listening to the wind. The musical landscape of Fallout New Vegas is built on 2 foundations, and understanding each of them separately helps explain why they work so well together. Inon Zur composed the game's original score. Zur is one of the most prolific composers in video game history. His credits include the Dragon Age series, the Baldur's Gate 3 score, shared with other composers, multiple iterations of the Fallout series, and dozens of other major titles. His approach to game music is orchestral in a way that references film scoring traditions, favoring large ensemble sounds and dramatic dynamic range. His Fallout 3 score established a particular template for the post-Bethesda version of the series: heavy, atmospheric, somewhat ominous, and his New Vegas score extends that template into the Mojave's specific register. The New Vegas score has a Western quality that Fallout 3's didn't quite need. The game is set in the Southwest, in a landscape that carries enormous cultural weight as the setting of American Westerns, and Xur's music draws on that heritage. There are Spanish guitar influences, there are dry, sandy timbres in the percussion, there are harmonica-like motifs that appear and disappear through the ambient tracks like something heard across a great distance. The music places you in a specific geographical and cultural tradition, which is part of how the game manages to feel like a place rather than a setting. The combat tracks in New Vegas are aggressive and percussive, driving without becoming chaotic, designed to keep the player's energy up during firefights without distracting from the moment-to-moment decisions that combat in New Vegas, especially at higher difficulties, requires. The exploration tracks are slow and contemplative, built for long periods of walking across empty terrain. There are dedicated tracks for each major location type. The Strip has music that captures the glitter and the slight seediness of its atmosphere. The Legion camps have something martial and threatening. The smaller settlements have quieter, more worn sounds. But it is Mark Morgan who provides the game's emotional center, because it is Mark Morgan who composed the radio music. Mark Morgan scored Fallout 1 and Fallout 2, and his work on those games remains among the most distinctive original music in the medium's history. His approach was electronic and experimental, influenced by ambient music, by film noir, by industrial sounds processed into something hypnotic and strange. The tracks from the original Fallouts have titles like Metallic Monks, City of the Lost, and Chosen One, and they sound like transmissions from a dead civilization, like something you'd find on a broken radio in a desert that used to be a city. For New Vegas, Bethesda and Obsidian licensed a selection of Morgan's original Fallout tracks to use as ambient background music. The music that plays when there is no radio station selected, the Wasteland's own score. This decision was significant for longtime Fallout fans, who heard Morgan's tracks and felt the continuity of the series' soul across the gap between the Black Isle era and the Bethesda era. The music said, "This is the same world. These are the same bones." But the radio stations are their own thing, and they deserve extended attention. Radio New Vegas, voiced by Wayne Newton as Mr. New Vegas, plays a selection of period-appropriate swing and big band recordings from the 1940s and 1950s. The playlist includes tracks by Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Nat King Cole, Louis Jordan, and others from the era that the Fallout universe's aesthetic is built around. The post-war optimism of mid-century America, the swing culture that preceded it, the particular combination of sophistication and accessibility that defined popular music before rock and roll changed everything. The song selection is not random. Each track resonates with the game's themes in ways that create a specific emotional texture. Ain't That a Kick in the Head by Dean Martin, a song about unexpected joy, about delight at finding something wonderful where you didn't expect it, plays on a radio in the game's opening hours while you're still orienting yourself to the world. The lyrics describe finding love, but in the context of waking up in a desert after being shot, they take on a slight darkly comic edge. Yes, this is a situation, yes, you are alive, and that is something. Big Iron by Marty Robbins. This is the song that everyone associates with New Vegas, the track that has become the game's unofficial anthem, the one that plays in memes and fan videos and the minds of players who haven't touched the game in years. It is a 1959 country western murder ballad about a Texas Ranger with a big iron on his hip, and it maps onto the courier's journey with a fidelity that seems almost designed. A traveler comes to town, things are not as peaceful as they appear, there will be violence. The song's tempo is perfect for walking. Its story is the game's story, compressed into 3 minutes. It's a sin to tell a lie. Jingle Jangle Jingle, Blue Moon. The playlist of Radio New Vegas is a curated emotional journey through the post-war American mood. and it pairs with the desert landscape and the game's moral complexity in ways that create a cognitive dissonance that is one of the game's defining qualities. You are doing difficult, sometimes terrible things in a broken world. And on the radio, someone's voice is smooth and warm and telling you that everything is going to be fine. The gap between the music and the reality is part of the meaning. Mojave Music Radio offers a different palette, country and western songs that lean into the desert setting even more directly. Music by artists like Sons of the Pioneers and Bob Wills and Hank Williams. The original Hank Williams, dead before the decade that most of the Fallout aesthetic draws from, was finished. This station sounds like old trucks and dust roads and the specific loneliness of wide-open space. It is for players who want the game to feel more like a western than a noir. The classical radio station doesn't have a DJ. It plays classical music, real classical music, public domain recordings of Beethoven and Brahms and others, without comment or context, just the music against the silence of the wasteland. This choice feels like a comment on permanence. Civilization may have ended, but Beethoven is still Beethoven. The music of 200 years ago is still here, playing into a world that destroyed itself, as indifferent and beautiful as it always was. Josh Sawyer revealed in an interview that he personally wrote several original country songs that appear in the game: Home on the Wastes, New Vegas Valley, and Streets of New Reno. These songs, which are in the game's files and which some players encounter during the course of normal play, were written in the country tradition with attention to the specific lyrical concerns of the Fallout universe: hardship, distance, the memory of better times, the persistence of human feeling in inhospitable conditions. The fact that the game's director wrote songs for his game, songs that sit alongside real recordings from the 1940s and 1950s, is a detail that says something about the level of investment the team brought to the project. The music of New Vegas is not background noise. It is part of the argument the game is making, about America, about nostalgia, about the gap between the culture we built and the use we put it to, about what survives when everything else is gone. The songs on the radio were playing before the bombs fell. They are playing after. Whatever happened in between, the music continued, and there is something in that continuity that is either deeply comforting or deeply sad, depending on how you hold it. Right now, if you let it, you can hear it. Somewhere across the Mojave, from a radio in a ruined building or a speaker mounted on a Securitron, a voice is singing about love and luck and the big iron on someone's hip. The stars are bright overhead. The desert is quiet in the way that only deserts can be quiet. And you are walking west, toward the lights on the horizon, because that is where the story is. Section 10. The DLC. Dead Money, Honest Hearts, Old World Blues, and Lonesome Road. 4 pieces of downloadable content were released for Fallout New Vegas between late 2010 and late 2011. Each one is a self-contained story, set in a distinct location with its own aesthetic and themes. And each one reflects the interests and obsessions of the specific writers who created them. Taken together, the 4 DLCs constitute something remarkable, a set of companion stories that deepen the main game without simply extending it, stories that are about something and that use the Fallout universe's specific tools to say things that couldn't be said in the main game's format. Dead Money came first, in December 2010, and it is the most formally severe of the 4. Chris Avallone wrote it, and it carries his particular fingerprints in every scene. The story takes place in the Sierra Madre Casino, a luxury resort that was under construction when the bombs fell, and which was, in the chaos of the war, subjected to a particular kind of catastrophe, a cloud, a red-tinted toxic vapor that covers the surrounding area and feeds a network of speaker towers that kill anyone who approaches them. The Sierra Madre never opened. Its vaults are full of pre-war wealth, caps, food, technology, that became legend in the wasteland, a treasure so dangerous and so inaccessible that it functions as a myth. Your courier is kidnapped and brought to the Sierra Madre by a man named Elijah, a former Brotherhood of Steel elder with an obsession for the casino's vault. You are fitted with a collar bomb that will kill you if you get 2 fists from Elijah's signal, and you are given 3 other people, also collared, as unwilling companions: Dean Domino, a pre-war lounge singer who has been surviving in the Sierra Madre for 200 years in a state of desperate, bitter stasis; Christine, a scribe who has been surgically muted as a form of torture and who communicates through gestures and terminal entries; and Dog/God, a former super mutant whose original personality and a secondary personality developed in captivity exist in alternating control. Dead Money is designed to make you uncomfortable. The Sierra Madre environment, the cloud, the ghost people enemies who are practically unkillable under normal circumstances, the speaker towers you must navigate around, the scarcity of supplies, creates an atmosphere of sustained unease that is unlike anything in the main game. Resources are stripped away. The comfortable rhythms of Fallout combat are disrupted. You are, for the duration of the DLC, a person with very limited options, which is precisely the experience its themes require, because Dead Money is about letting go. Elijah wants the vault. Dean Domino wants revenge on the Sierra Madre's original owner, who humiliated him before the war. Christine wants Elijah, specifically wants him dead, with the focused patience of a person who has spent years becoming capable of doing the things she has promised herself she will do. And you are in the middle, trying to survive a situation you didn't choose, surrounded by people whose obsessions will kill them, and possibly you. The DLC's ending, and there are multiple paths, each with different moral weight, is structured around whether you can release the others from their obsessions, or whether the obsessions pull everyone down. The most difficult ending, the one that requires the most skill and the most clarity of a purpose, is also the one that lets everyone go free, that severs the connections that have been holding people in place. The Sierra Madre, with all its legendary wealth, is left behind. The gold in the vault is beautiful and deadly and worthless in the context of a world that doesn't recognize the currency. And Elijah, whose obsession was the most complete and the most destructive, meets the consequences of refusing to let go. Avione has said that Dead Money was about the way certain kinds of desire, for wealth, for revenge, for a past that can be recaptured, become prisons. The Sierra Madre is a physical representation of that idea, a place that promises everything and delivers only entrapment for anyone who approaches it wanting something from it. Honest Hearts came next, in May 2011. And it is the most overtly Western of the DLCs set in Zion Canyon, a version of the real Zion National Park in Utah, rendered in the game's engine with stunning fidelity to the real landscape's character. The DLC's writer is John Gonzalez, and its concerns are different from Dead Money's. Where Dead Money is about obsession and release, Honest Hearts is about violence and redemption, and the question of whether a person who has done terrible things can become someone different. Joshua Graham is the DLC's central figure. He was, before the events of the main game, Caesar's legate, his first, most formidable military commander, the man who taught Caesar's legion its most effective tactics and who prosecuted its early campaigns with extraordinary efficiency and equally extraordinary brutality. When he failed at the first battle of Hoover Dam, Caesar had him burned alive and thrown into the Grand Canyon. He survived. The survival itself became a kind of myth, the burned man, the ghost of the Legion's first war, somehow still walking. Graham found his way to Zion, where he joined a community of Mormon missionaries and tribal people, the New Canaanites and the Dead Horses and the Sorrows. He carries his burns under white bandages. He carries his faith with a specificity and intensity that suggests someone who found religion at the point where all other explanations for his survival had been exhausted. He carries his capacity for violence, undiminished, and the DLC's central tension is between the man of faith, who wants to shepherd his people through a conflict, and the old soldier who knows exactly how to end conflicts quickly and at considerable cost to everyone involved. Graham's famous line, "I have a specific set of skills, and I am not afraid to use them in the service of the Lord," captures the character's duality with extraordinary economy. He is funny and terrifying in the same breath. His faith is genuine. His willingness to act on that faith through violence is equally genuine. The DLC asks you to decide whether to follow his approach or try to find a less total solution, and neither option is clean. Zion Canyon itself is beautiful in a way that the main game's Mojave, with its browns and grays, rarely is. The canyon is green and red and gold. The water is clear and cold-sounding. The vistas are long and dramatic. The game captures something of the real Zion's quality of a landscape so extreme that it doesn't quite seem real, and it uses that quality to contrast with the human darkness that is happening within it. The most terrible events in Honest Hearts take place against backdrops of stunning natural beauty, and the contrast is not accidental. Old World Blues came in July 2011, and is the strangest of the 4 DLCs, the most willing to be absurd, the most clearly enjoying itself. It is a comedy of ideas set in the Big MT, the Big Empty, a pre-war research facility where scientists experimented with technology so advanced and so irresponsible that the most reasonable description of the facility's output is all of it going wrong in different ways simultaneously. The scientists of the Big MT, who appear as disembodied brains in jars wandering around on floating legs, a modification they made to themselves in the course of their research, are parodies of a certain kind of brilliant, amoral academic, people so in love with the act of discovery that they entirely lost track of the question of whether the things they were discovering should be discovered. They have performed experiments on everything, on the local wildlife, on each other, on the courier, whose brain and spine and heart have been removed and replaced with technological substitutes without their knowledge or consent. Because in the Big MT, consent is a concept that never made it past the design review stage. The DLC is funny. It is persistently, sometimes aggressively funny, with dialogue that winks at the player and situations that escalate from absurd to more absurd in the tradition of science fiction comedy. But it is also, underneath the comedy, about something real, about the relationship between curiosity and responsibility, about what happens when intelligent people remove the constraints that keep their interests from becoming dangerous, about the specific hubris of believing that because you can do a thing, you should. The villain, a rogue AI called Mobius, is, it turns out, not quite a villain. His story, when you fully understand it, is one of the game's most poignant. A person, or the remnant of a person, who saw what was coming and made themselves into an obstacle, because an obstacle was what was needed, and who has been doing this for decades in a place where time moves strangely and everything is broken. Old World Blues also expands significantly on the lore of the Courier and on the specific history of the technologies that define the Fallout universe. The connection between the Big MT's research and the Mojave's current state, the Robo-Scorpions, the Spore Plants, the Cazadores, is laid out in the DELC's backstory, giving a history to things the player has been encountering in the main game. The DLC also contains the think tank, the robotic brains who are at once incompetent and responsible for the most dangerous things in the game, and their specific brand of brilliant stupidity is one of the funniest sustained performances in the game's voice cast. Lonesome Road is the final DLC, released in September 2011, and it is the most personal and the most narratively direct of the 4. It is, in some ways, the explanation the whole game has been building toward, the story of who the Courier was before the game began, and what they did, and what that did to the world. The antagonist is Ulysses, the character Chris Avallone built as a philosophical shadow for the player character, a man who was also a courier, who also walked the Mojave, who made different choices and reached different conclusions. Ulysses believes that the courier's past actions, specifically a delivery that, without the courier's knowledge, triggered events that destroyed a settlement called the Divide and its people, are a form of guilt that must be answered. He has brought you to the Divide, which is now a devastated landscape of ruined highways and nuclear warheads and the marked men, soldiers who were caught in the nuclear explosion and have been surviving in the ruins, half dead, entirely dangerous. The Divide is visually extraordinary, a canyon of ruined American infrastructure, highways collapsed into each other, a sky full of perpetual storm, the bones of a place that was supposed to be a new beginning. Ulysses has set things up so that the confrontation is inevitable, so that you must walk the Divide to reach him, so that by the time you find him, you have experienced the consequences of what happened here. The conversation at the end, the actual argument between the Courier and Ulysses, is one of the best written scenes in the game. Ulysses is not wrong exactly. What he describes did happen. The consequences he points to are real. His argument that the Courier carries responsibility for those consequences is coherent. What he misses, or what the player can argue he misses, is the question of whether actions taken in ignorance carry the same moral weight as actions taken in knowledge, and whether destruction visited on people who were already building a legacy of violence is the same as destruction visited on innocents. You can talk him down. It requires specific skills and specific choices, but you can make Ulysses put down his weapon and walk away. Or you can fight. Or you can redirect the warheads he's been planning to launch. The DLC's endings reflect the complexity of the argument that preceded them. Lonesome Road ends with the courier standing at the edge of the divide, looking east toward whatever the Mojave has become as a result of the battle at Hoover Dam. Ulysses is gone, in one direction or another. The road stretches ahead. And the game, in its final DLC, has done what it set out to do. Explain not just what you did in the Mojave, but who you were before you arrived, and what the distance between those two things costs. Together, the 4 DLCs form a meditation on the game's central themes: letting go, dead money, violence and redemption, honest hearts, curiosity without accountability, old world blues, and responsibility for the consequences of your actions, Lonesome Road. Each one could stand alone. Together, they make the game larger than its main story, deeper than its factions, more human than its mechanics. Section 11, Legacy, Modding, the TV show, and Why New Vegas Never Dies, Fallout. New Vegas was released in October 2010. It is now, as of this recording, more than 14 years old. By the normal metabolism of the video game industry, this should make it a historical artifact, something you mention when talking about the evolution of the RPG genre, something you recommend to people interested in the period, something that sits in the back catalog and is occasionally revisited by nostalgics. It is not that. It is one of the most actively played RPGs on PC right now. Its modding community is producing new content at a rate that would be impressive for a game in its first year. Its subreddit has millions of members, clips of its dialogue, references to its characters, arguments about its factions. These circulate constantly through gaming culture, as fresh and frequently as engaged as content about games released last month. How does a game from 2010 stay alive in 2025? The first and most important answer is the modding community. The creation engine that powers New Vegas is the same engine that powers Fallout 3 and the Elder Scrolls games, and Bethesda has always been relatively open about allowing modding tools for their games. The game shipped with a version of the Garden of Eden creation kit, the GECK, that allowed players to create their own content. New quests, new areas, new characters, new items, new dialogue, new everything. The modding community embraced this with an intensity that few other games have seen. The New Vegas Nexus, the primary repository for mods, hosts tens of thousands of individual modifications, ranging from single-item texture replacements to complete game overhauls that add dozens of hours of new content. The scope of what the modding community has built is genuinely staggering. The most prominent major overhauls include Fallout, Project Brazil, a massive standalone expansion set in California that creates an entirely new story within the New Vegas universe, with new voice acting and new quests and a level of production quality that rivals professional game development. It was in development for years and released in chapters, and it represents thousands of hours of volunteer work by people who love the game enough to learn the tools and build something significant. The Frontier is another landmark mod, a game-sized expansion set in post-nuclear Portland, Oregon, with new factions, new vehicles, drivable cars and motorcycles, a feature the base game never had, and an entirely new story that explores a different corner of the wasteland. It was released in early 2021 to considerable fanfare and considerable controversy. Some content was removed after complaints from the community, but its existence, a volunteer-made expansion with a post-game world map larger than the base game, speaks to the depth of the New Vegas community's commitment. Dust is perhaps the most extreme example of what modding can do to New Vegas. It strips away the main story entirely, removes most of the game's NPCs, and creates a survival horror experience set in a future where everything has gone wrong in ways that the base game's endings didn't prevent. It is bleak and challenging and has nothing in common with the base game's politics and moral complexity, and it is brilliant in its specific way. An argument that the same engine and the same world can tell a completely different kind of story. There is the Tale of Two Wastelands project, which merges Fallout 3 and Fallout New Vegas into a single game, allowing players to experience both worlds within a single playthrough and character. This is technically extraordinary. Merging two games that run on the same engine but were built by different teams with different priorities requires enormous amounts of compatibility work. And it represents a community that has, over years, essentially rebuilt the game from the inside out in the service of their vision of what it should be. The New Vegas Bounties series, the original TTW experience, Viva New Vegas, a comprehensive stability and visual overhaul guide, Spice of Life, new NPC faces, New California, the aforementioned Project Brazil, AWOP, A World of Pain, adding dungeons. The catalog of significant mods runs into the hundreds before you reach the smaller but equally beloved individual additions. New weapons, new radio stations with licensed music, new companions, new ways to experience the existing story. The modding community has, in effect, kept New Vegas in a state of perpetual development. When the official developer stopped adding content, the community continued. When the official tools became insufficient, community members built better ones. When the engine began to show its age, the community patched it with solutions that Bethesda never implemented. The result is a game that, in 2025, can be played in a form substantially more stable and visually impressive than the one that shipped in 2010, surrounded by thousands of hours of community-created content. This is a specific kind of love. It is not passive appreciation. It is sustained, skilled, technical investment in a game that the industry would have otherwise left behind. The people building New Vegas mods are learning programming, 3D modeling, audio design, and dialogue writing in the service of a 14-year-old game, because the game is worth it. The second major factor in New Vegas's persistence is the television series. In April 2024, Amazon Prime Video released the first season of Fallout, a live-action adaptation of the game franchise. The series is set after the events of the main games, in a world that references the game's history without adapting any specific storyline. Its central character, a vault dweller named Lucy, emerges from Vault 33 into the post-nuclear California wasteland and encounters the various factions and conflicts of the surface world. The show was executive produced by Lisa Joy and Jonathan Nolan, the creators of Westworld, and it received strong critical reviews and enormous viewership numbers. The show does not adapt New Vegas specifically, but it acknowledges New Vegas in ways that sent existing fans into a significant state of excitement. In its final episode, the Brotherhood of Steel's arrival in New California reveals a reference to New Vegas that confirms the game's events occurred in the show's timeline. A character's backstory explicitly connects to the NCR's collapse, which was one of the possible endings of New Vegas. And the show's attention to the specific aesthetic and thematic concerns of the Fallout universe, the American mythology, the retro-futurism, the dark comedy, the moral complexity, reflects a genuine engagement with the game's content rather than a surface-level adaptation. The effect of the show on New Vegas specifically was dramatic. Following the series premiere, the game saw a surge in new players. Steam concurrent player counts for New Vegas spiked dramatically, with tens of thousands of people playing the game simultaneously, many for the first time. Players who had watched the show and loved it went looking for more Fallout, and New Vegas was consistently the recommendation they received from fans. If you want the best story the franchise has to offer, start there. This created an unusual situation where a 2010 game was receiving the kind of influx of new players normally associated with major releases or free-to-play events. Community guides for new players proliferated. Veteran players posted orientation threads. The subreddits expanded. The whole ecosystem around the game was energized by the arrival of people who had come through the television series and were encountering the game for the first time. There is also the matter of what New Vegas represents in ongoing conversations about what role-playing games should be. The discourse around ERPG design, specifically around the relationship between narrative agency, systemic depth, and accessibility, frequently returns to New Vegas as a case study. When Fallout 4 released in 2015, with a simplified dialogue system and a reduced focus on faction politics and moral complexity, the comparison to New Vegas was immediate and largely unfavorable among fans of deep RPG design. The game sold enormously. It is the best-selling game in the franchise by some measures, but the critical consensus among people who care about the specific things New Vegas did was that something had been traded away in the move toward accessibility. This comparison, and the ongoing debate it represents, keeps New Vegas present in game design conversations in a way that simple nostalgia doesn't fully account for. The game is a reference point, an example of what the medium can do when it trusts players to engage with complexity. It is cited in discussions about dialogue systems, faction design, the role of player agency and narrative, the mechanics of karma and reputation. It is assigned in game design courses. It is analyzed in academic papers about interactive narrative. It is, at this point, not just a game, but a document. Josh Sawyer has occasionally returned to New Vegas in interviews across the years, reflecting on it with the combination of pride and regret that most creators feel about work they did under significant constraints. He has acknowledged the things he would do differently, the features he wishes had made it in, the ways the compressed timeline affected the finished product. He has also been clear about what he feels the team got right: the faction design, the companion writing, the Mojave as a place. He speaks about the game as a craftsman speaks about a piece of work he respects, even while knowing its flaws. The team that made New Vegas has scattered across the industry in the years since. Some are at Obsidian, which is now under Microsoft's umbrella and has the resources and stability that eluded it for so long. Some are at other studios. Chris Avellone left Obsidian in 2015 under circumstances that became complicated and public, and his relationship to the game and the studio is part of a larger story that is difficult to tell cleanly. But the people who were in the room when the Mojave was built have, in one way or another, carried it with them. And the games they've made since reflect the influence of that specific collaborative experience. What is it finally about Fallout New Vegas that makes it last? There are games with better graphics, smoother mechanics, larger worlds, more polished presentations. There are games with bigger budgets and longer development timelines and fewer bugs. There are games with more recent references and more modern sensibilities. But very few games take their players as seriously as New Vegas does. Very few games build a world with such specific attention to the questions that world raises. Very few games give you 4 factions to choose between and make each of them genuinely arguable, where the choice is not between good and evil, but between 4 different theories of how to organize human society after catastrophe, each with its own merits and its own costs. Very few games have a cast of companions this complete, this specific, this human. 8 people, each carrying a burden, each worth knowing, each capable of surprising you if you give them enough time. Very few games use their setting, a real place, a real history, a real landscape, with this much attention and respect. And very few games have a radio that plays Big Iron while you walk across the desert under a sky full of stars, and make you feel, against every reasonable expectation, that this broken world is beautiful. The lights of New Vegas never really go out, not in the game, where House keeps them running through decades of silence and war. Not in the culture, where the game keeps finding new people to fall in love with it. Not in the memories of everyone who has walked the Mojave at night, carrying too much and moving through a world that doesn't care about them, and found in that experience something true. The desert is quiet now. The story has been told, or enough of it has been told for tonight. You can sleep. You can let the Mojave recede into the background, into the middle distance, into the half-dream space where good stories live when you're not actively thinking about them. The NCR and the Legion are still there, doing what they do. House is still in his tower, watching. Yes Man is still smiling his painted smile. The courier is on the road somewhere, probably, walking west with a weapon and a mission and a past that's complicated and a future that's open. And the radio is playing something beautiful in the dark. If you made it all the way here, thank you. Genuinely. Drop a comment with wherever you fell asleep if you're just waking up and reading this. And if this kind of long-form storytelling is what you come here for, hit subscribe because there's a lot more of this to come. Good night. Section 12. The Vaults. Pre-war history and the world before the world to understand the world. Of Fallout New Vegas. To really understand it, the way you understand a place you've lived in rather than just visited, you need to spend some time with the world that came before it. The Fallout universe has a pre-war history that is just as carefully constructed as its post-war present, and New Vegas draws on that history in ways that give its setting and its conflicts a depth that rewards attention. The Great War happened on October 23rd, 2077. This is a fixed point in the Fallout timeline, the moment around which everything else is organized, the hinge on which the old world swung shut and the new world opened. In the space of 2 hours, nuclear weapons were exchanged between the United States, China, and various other powers in a cascade of launches that could not be called back once they started, and the civilization that had been building toward its own particular version of tomorrow was replaced by a new kind of world entirely. But the bombs fell on a world that had already been changing for decades. The timeline leading up to the Great War in the Fallout universe is not quite our timeline. It is a version of the 20th century in which certain historical paths were taken and others weren't, in which the transistor was never invented, keeping electronics large and vacuum tube based, in which the space program of the 1950s and 1960s produced a specific kind of optimism and technology without the cultural upheavals of the real counterculture period, in which the United States, China, and Europe all continued developing as distinct technological civilizations without the globalization that defined our late 20th century. The result, by the 2070s, was a world that looked simultaneously more advanced and more primitive than ours. Nuclear-powered cars, sophisticated robots, advanced medical technology, and fully working weather control systems, but with a social and cultural texture that still felt recognizably mid-century American. The retrofuturism that defines Fallout's aesthetic is not simply a style choice. It is a specific historical argument about what happens when a civilization gets stuck in a particular cultural moment and builds its future from within that moment rather than beyond it. The resource wars defined the decades before the bombs. Oil ran out, or ran critically low, and the world's powers went to war over what remained. The European Commonwealth fractured into individual nations competing for resources. The Middle East became a theater of extended military conflict. The United States annexed Canada in 2076 to secure its northern border and its resources, a move of imperial aggression that generated enormous resistance and was prosecuted with the kind of systematic brutality that the game documents in environmental details throughout the northern parts of the continent. The Sino-American War began in 2066, when China invaded Alaska in a desperate move to secure oil reserves, and the United States' response defined the last decade before the bombs. The Anchorage Campaign, which players of Fallout 3 can experience in the Operation Anchorage DLC, was a brutal, grinding conflict in the Alaskan winter, and its veterans came home changed in ways that the American government was not particularly interested in addressing. The T-51 power armor, the most advanced pre-war military technology, was developed for the Anchorage campaign and became the symbol of a military that believed technology could solve any problem if the technology was powerful enough. Vault-Tec Corporation built the vaults under contract with the U.S. government, and the official purpose of the vaults, to shelter American citizens from nuclear attack, was real enough to serve as cover for their actual purpose, which was considerably darker. The vaults were, in their design, social experiments. Each one was built around a specific experimental parameter, a variable that would be introduced and monitored to determine how human beings responded under extreme conditions. Some of the experiments were relatively benign by the standards of what Vault-Tec designed. A vault where all residents wore clown suits, a vault that contained only one man and 999 women, a vault where everyone got to vote on everything, but the votes were always tied. Some were significantly worse. A vault where the water chip was replaced slightly too late, so that some residents died of thirst before a solution was found. A vault where social conflict was engineered by providing half the residents with comfortable amenities and denying them to the other half. A vault where a specific kind of stasis pod was tested on most of the residents, who did not know they were going to sleep for decades when they entered. The vault that appears in New Vegas, Vault 21, is one of the less cruel experiments. In Vault 21, all disputes, including the allocation of living space and resources, were resolved by gambling. The social order of the vault was determined by chance and skill in games of probability. In theory, this made everyone equal. The vault's governance was not determined by birth or strength or social connections, but by the outcome of games that anyone could potentially win. In practice, it created a highly stratified community in which a small number of skilled gamblers controlled most of the vault's resources while everyone else played against a house edge they couldn't overcome. Mr. House eventually had Vault 21's residents displaced, and the vault converted into storage for his own purposes, burying most of it under concrete. The casino that sits above it on the strip is a calculated homage to the vault's original gambling culture, which is the kind of irony that the game offers with perfect deadpan. The descendants of a community organized around gambling now run a casino for the entertainment of the new Las Vegas, and the vault that shaped them is buried under their feet. The vaults scattered across the Mojave and its surrounding regions tell different stories. and exploring them is one of the game's quieter pleasures. Each vault is an archaeological site, a place where the conditions of a specific experiment played out over generations, leaving behind the evidence of how people behaved when the normal structures of society were replaced with the artificial ones Vault-Tec designed. Some are populated by the descendants of the original residents. Some are long since abandoned. Some contain only the evidence of what happened when the experiment went wrong in ways that Vault-Tec either didn't anticipate or found acceptably interesting. The vaults in New Vegas draw from Van Buren's design in several instances. Vault 34, which lies outside the main playable area but whose displaced residents make up the boomers at Nellis Air Force Base, was an experiment in arming the population. Every resident had access to the vault's extensive armory, and the predictable result was that the vault's social conflicts became quickly and terminally violent. The boomers who escaped and built their community at Nellis carry the vault's culture with them. Their solution to the outside world's dangers is to control access to overwhelming firepower, a lesson learned from watching what guns do to communities that don't have laws strict enough to contain them. Vault 19 and its connection to the Powder Gangers is another piece of the Mojave's pre-game history. The vault was an experiment in paranoia, with its residents divided into two groups, red and blue, and fed continuous suggestions that the other group was plotting against them. The social collapse of Vault 19 was rapid and predictable. Its eventual connection to the NCRCF, the correctional facility outside Prim, provides a backstory for the escaped prisoners who are causing problems in the game's opening hours. There is the history of the New California Republic itself, which extends back to Shady Sands, the community founded by survivors from Vault 13 after the events of Fallout 1. The NCR's history is the history of a successful reconstruction, a genuine case of post-apocalyptic civilization rebuilding, complete with all the compromises and expansions and institutional failures that the process required. The followers of the Apocalypse, who appear in the game's Freeside location and who employ Arcade Gannon, are another organization with roots in the earlier games, originally founded by the Vault Dwellers' descendants as a counterpoint to the NCR's militarism. All of this history, the vaults and the resource wars and the Sino-American conflict and the specific trajectories of the organizations that survived, is present in New Vegas as a layer underneath the present tense conflict. The game does not require you to know it, but knowing it changes how everything feels. The NCR's expansionism is more comprehensible when you know how it grew from a single settlement. Caesar's specific obsessions are more understandable when you know he was trained by the followers of the Apocalypse. The Mojave's particular position at the intersection of multiple competing powers is more legible when you understand the history that placed those powers there. The pre-war world in New Vegas is present in its absence. The game's locations, the ruined motels and gas stations and diners, the military installations and research facilities and corporate campuses are all artifacts of a civilization that believed it was building towards something. The people who lived in the houses whose bones you walk through had jobs and families and opinions about politics. They argued about the same things people argue about. They were killed not by an act of God, but by the accumulated consequences of the choices their civilization made, slowly and then all at once, on a Tuesday in October. This is the world that House remembers, from the inside of his pod. This is the world that the Sierra Madre was being built to celebrate. This is the world whose music still plays on the radio in the desert, whose beer bottles still sit in ruined refrigerators in ruined kitchens, whose children's toys still lie in ruined nurseries across the wasteland. The pre-war world is not gone. It is present everywhere, in everything, decomposing slowly back into the earth. The vaults were supposed to preserve it. Some of them preserved something. What emerged from the better ones was the seed of what might come next. Imperfect, damaged, shaped by the experiments that were supposed to test it, but alive. The NCR emerged from a vault. The Brotherhood of Steel emerged from a military bunker. Even the most brutal post-war institutions have pre-war origins, carry pre-war DNA, are trying in their different ways to either restore the old world or build something better from its parts. This is the argument underneath New Vegas's surface. Not just what comes next, but what was there before, and whether the answer to the first question is constrained by the answer to the second. Section 13, the mechanics of meaning, how New Vegas uses its rules. There is a level at which every video game is just rules. Numbers that go up, numbers that go down, meters that fill and deplete, animations that play when conditions are met. At this level, Fallout New Vegas is a game about the courier's special stats: strength, perception, endurance, charisma, intelligence, agility, and luck, and the skills that derive from them, and the perks that modify those skills, and the way those numbers intersect with a world full of other numbers to produce outcomes. But rules mean things. The rules of New Vegas, examined carefully, are an argument about what kind of person you should want to be and what kind of world you should want to make. This is not an accident. It is one of Josh Sawyer's specific interests as a designer: the relationship between mechanical systems and the moral or philosophical propositions they embody, and it runs through every significant decision in the game's design. The special system, which New Vegas inherits from the earlier Fallout games, assigns your character their fundamental nature at creation. High intelligence means more skill points, more dialogue options, more solutions to problems that don't involve violence. Low intelligence reduces available options dramatically. There are entire conversations unavailable to low intelligence characters, entire paths through quests that require a certain baseline of cognitive ability. The game is not neutral about this. It rewards intellectual investment and punishes its absence. But it also provides for characters who aren't intelligent. A high-strength, low-intelligence character can progress through the game, accomplish the main quest, affect the outcome of the Mojave's future. They just do it differently, through combat rather than conversation, through force rather than argument. The game makes room for this character without celebrating them. The options available to them are real options. They are also, in many cases, the harder options, the options that burn more resources and leave more damage behind. The luck stat deserves particular attention because it is the most philosophically interesting of the special attributes. Luck in New Vegas is both a mechanical modifier. It affects critical hit chance, casino winnings, and miscellaneous probability calculations throughout the game, and a narrative element. High luck characters find better items in containers. Things go slightly right for them in ways that can't be fully explained by their other abilities. There is an implication, embedded in the system, that the Mojave responds differently to lucky people than to unlucky ones, that fortune is a real force, and it discriminates. This is a specifically American cultural argument. The American mythology of the self-made man has always contained an uncomfortable relationship with luck. The stories emphasize individual effort, but the individuals who tell the stories often acknowledge, in quiet moments, that being in the right place at the right time mattered as much as anything they did. Las Vegas, the city on whose bones New Vegas is built, is a city explicitly organized around luck, around the relationship between probability and desire, around whether the universe has favorites. Putting luck as a primary character attribute in a game set in post-nuclear Las Vegas is a design decision with clear thematic resonance. The karma system, which tracks whether your actions are broadly good or evil on a single axis, is one of the game's more criticized features, and the criticism is largely fair. Karma in New Vegas is blunter than the game's other moral instruments. It reduces complex moral questions to a positive-negative scale that can't capture the nuance of, for example, helping the NCR while also working for the Legion, or doing evil things for reasons that might be good. The reputation system, which tracks your standing with individual factions on separate axes of fame and infamy, is considerably more sophisticated, and in most contexts, it does more interesting work. The reputation system is one of the game's most elegant mechanical achievements. Rather than a single moral meter, you have a web of relationships. Each faction, each settlement, each major organization tracking your history with them independently. You can be idolized by the NCR and vilified by the Legion. You can be neutral with most of the Mojave while being deeply trusted by the followers. The system tracks not just what you've done, but specifically what you've done in relation to each group, which means that the same action can improve your standing with one faction while damaging it with another. This creates a game where your reputation precedes you in specific, legible ways. Walk into an NCR camp as someone with Legion infamy, and the soldiers will comment. Walk into a Freeside bar as someone who helped the locals, and the atmosphere is different than it would be for a stranger. The world responds to what you've actually done, which is far more immersive and far more morally interesting than a single karma number could ever be. The skill check system, where certain dialogue options and actions are only available if you have a high enough relevant skill, is the mechanical heart of New Vegas's approach to player agency. A high-speech character can resolve many situations without violence. A high barter character gets better prices and can sometimes use economic arguments to resolve conflicts. High medicine means you can talk to doctors and scientists on their own terms. High science opens up computer terminals, technological solutions, the ability to interface with the game's electronic infrastructure. High explosives, at sufficient levels, makes the courier a walking artillery unit. Each high skill level is a different kind of person, with different relationships to the world and different available paths through its problems. The game never forces you to be any particular kind of person. It creates incentives, certain builds make certain things easier, but the options remain available. The person with very low speech can still achieve the same outcomes as the high-speech character. They just have to find different paths, usually harder ones. This is Sawyer's design philosophy expressed in mechanical form. Competence should matter, but not in a way that forecloses the game for people who made different choices. The RPG design tradition holds that character builds should differentiate experiences without making any experience impossible. New Vegas comes closer to this ideal than almost any game in the genre. The companion mechanics deserve attention here as well. Each companion has a specific perk that benefits you while they're traveling with you, and these perks are tailored to the companion's identity in ways that extend the meaning of having them around. Boone's perk improves your detection range. He's a trained sniper, always watching for threats. Raoul's perk relates to weapon maintenance, because he's a mechanic. Arcade's perk provides a bonus when you're near death, because he's a doctor who has learned to perform best in crisis situations. The companion's abilities are expressions of their characters, which means that choosing who to travel with is not just a practical decision, but a statement about whose way of seeing the world you value. The hardcore mode, introduced in New Vegas, the first Fallout game to include it, transforms the game's survival mechanics into something genuinely demanding. In hardcore mode, you need to eat and drink and sleep. Injuries to limbs require actual medical attention rather than just stim packs. Ammunition has weight, which affects how much you can carry, and therefore forces difficult decisions about loadout. Companions can die permanently rather than just being incapacitated. Hardcore mode changes the game's meaning at a fundamental level. The Mojave, under normal conditions, is dangerous but manageable. The right gear and enough stim packs will get you through most situations. Under hardcore conditions, the Mojave is genuinely hostile. Water is precious. Food is necessary. The distance between settlements becomes meaningful in a way it isn't otherwise, because you have to manage your resources across that distance. The game becomes, in hardcore mode, less of an action RPG and more of a survival story. And the story it tells in that mode is about what it actually costs to keep a body alive in a desert. Sawyer has said that hardcore mode was his preferred way to play the game, and the balance adjustments in his personal J. Sawyer mod are built around it. He wanted the game to ask more of the player, to make the choices about where to go and what to carry, and who to help feel more consequential. The option is there, and many players have never touched it. Many others swear by it. The existence of both groups, playing the same game differently, is itself an expression of what the game's design makes possible. The VATS system, Vault-Tec Assisted Targeting System, allows you to pause combat, target specific body parts with percentage-based accuracy ratings, and queue up attacks. It is inherited from earlier Fallout games and adapted for New Vegas's real-time with pause engine. It is the game's concession to the tradition of turn-based tactical combat that defined the original games, a way of allowing careful, deliberate combat choices within a system that otherwise runs in real time. In the broader context of the game's design philosophy, VATS is interesting as a statement about pace. The Mojave is full of things trying to kill you, and combat in real time can be chaotic and fast and unforgiving. VATS allows you to stop, observe, plan, make a choice. It imposes a moment of tactical thought on a context that would otherwise reward only reflexes. The game is offering you options that require deliberation alongside options that require speed, and it is making both legitimate. This is New Vegas at its most characteristic. The game that always, everywhere, offers you a choice, and trusts you to make it. Section 14, Inimizummaun, the desert at night, atmosphere, sound, and the art of empty space. There is a specific experience that Fallout New Vegas offers that no other game quite replicates, and it happens most fully during the hours between midnight and dawn in the game's world. When the virtual sun is down and the virtual stars are out and the heat of the simulated day has given way to the simulated cool of the high desert night, the Mojave becomes something different, quieter, stranger, more beautiful, and more dangerous at the same time. This particular quality is the result of deliberate artistic choices made by a team that had thought carefully about what the Mojave at night actually feels like. And it is worth dwelling on because it is one of the things the game does that games less committed to place simply don't bother with. The sound design at night changes. The ambient noise shifts from the hum and buzz of daytime, insects, distant machinery, the occasional NPC's footsteps on gravel, to something more sparse and lower in the mix. There are night insects in the high desert, their calls different from the daytime ones, and the sound team included this detail. Wind becomes more audible at night, moving across the landscape in gusts that don't appear in the daytime mix. Distant coyotes, which are native to the actual Mojave, appear in the night ambiance as a feature that places you in a real ecosystem rather than a generic wasteland. The lighting changes in ways that communicate something true about how darkness works in a desert. There is ambient starlight, not the flat darkness of a city night, where light pollution reduces everything to a gray-orange haze, but the specific darkness of a genuinely dark sky, where the stars provide enough light to see by if your eyes adjust. The game's night is dark, but it is not blind. You can navigate by the landscape, can see the silhouette of Joshua trees against the slightly lighter sky, can read the terrain. The color palette at night shifts toward blue and gray and the dark green of scrub brush under low light, losing the warm oranges and tans of the daytime. This color shift is accurate to the real desert, and it creates a different emotional register, cooler, quieter, more solitary. The neon of the strip is more visible against the night sky, its colors richer and more dramatic than they appear in daylight, which is how Las Vegas's lighting was always meant to be experienced, not as competition with the sun, but as a replacement for it. The enemies at night are different from the daytime ones. Certain creatures that shelter from the heat during the day emerge at night. Night stalkers, which are the horrifying hybrid of coyote and rattlesnake that represent one of the Mojave's more unsettling life forms, are primarily nocturnal. The Legion scouts move differently at night, using darkness as cover. Human bandits are more likely to be encountered near fires, since they need light too, which means you can sometimes see their encampments before you reach them. A small fire on a hillside, the distant murmur of voices. There is something that happens to the courier's movement at night that isn't a mechanical change, but an experiential one. You slow down. Not because the game makes you slow down, but because the darkness and the quiet and the specific quality of the night atmosphere induce a different pace of play. Players who rush through the day, Ms. Mojave, checking things off, tend to pause at night, look around, take in the landscape. The game has made a space that earns a slower pace, and players respond to it. The campfire system, introduced in New Vegas, is related to this. Building and using a campfire, cooking food, crafting certain items, requires stopping, which requires choosing a moment to stop, which requires a relationship with the landscape and with time. Where do you make camp? Is it defensible? Are you close enough to what you're doing next, or far enough from what you're leaving behind? The act of stopping for the night, of making a fire, and watching it for a moment before moving on, is one of the most atmospheric choices in the game, even though it is mechanically simple. The radio at night is different. This is partly because the mix of what's available to listen to doesn't change, but the experience of listening changes. A swing song that sounds jaunty in the afternoon sounds melancholy after midnight, not because the song has changed, but because you have changed, because the darkness and the distance and the specific quality of the night have put you in a different relationship to the music. Blue Moon, which is in the Radio New Vegas playlist, is a song about loneliness and longing, and it is considerably more effective at 3 in the morning than at noon. The sky itself is something the art team gave significant thought to. The Mojave in the game has a sky that changes in quality throughout the day and night. The blue of midday is a different, harder blue than the early morning. The sunset is long and complex in its colors. The night sky is genuinely starry in a way that most game skies are not. The Milky Way is visible on clear nights, a smear of light across the dark. When there is no cloud cover and no moon, the sky is remarkable, and the game gives you reason to look up at it. Clouds appear and move across the sky in a way that affects the quality of the light on the ground. A high, thin overcast diffuses the sunlight differently than a clear sky, and the game's lighting engine responds to this. During sandstorms, visibility drops, and the world takes on the yellow-brown tint of a world full of airborne dust, and the sound of the storm is layered and directional. These weather events are not just visual spectacle. They change the tactical and navigational situation. It is harder to see enemies coming, harder to spot landmarks for navigation, harder to move quickly, and they change the emotional atmosphere, the Mojave suddenly feeling more hostile and less familiar. The abandoned places of the Mojave have their own specific nighttime quality. A ruined motel, explored by day, reads as a piece of environmental storytelling. You note the details, the evidence of the people who lived there before the bombs, the marks of whatever happened after. Explored at night, the same motel takes on a different weight. The darkness makes its absence more present. The quiet makes the ghosts more audible. You notice differently. The attention the environment rewards at night is different from the attention it rewards in daylight, and both are real. This is the art of empty space, of atmosphere, of a game that understood that a world worth caring about needs to be beautiful sometimes, needs to be quiet sometimes, needs to give you a moment where nothing is happening and everything is felt. The Mojave at night in Fallout. New Vegas is one of the better arguments for the video game as a medium for experience. Not just for narrative or mechanics or challenge, but for the simple act of being somewhere and feeling what that somewhere has to offer. Rest in that for a moment, as you rest. Let the night version of the Mojave exist in your imagination, cool and dark and full of, see the stars, the wind moving across the scrub, a coyote somewhere in the middle distance, and on the radio, something beautiful playing for no one in particular except you. Section 15. The Courier. Identity, agency, and the most personal character in the wasteland. You are the courier. This is the game's central premise, and it is deceptively simple. You are a person whose job is to carry things from one place to another, who was hired to deliver a package to a casino in New Vegas and was shot in the head for their trouble, and who woke up in a small desert town with a restored body and an open future. You can be anything. You can come from anywhere. Your history, beyond a set of starting statistics and a few choices made at character creation, is yours to define. This openness is one of the game's greatest strengths and also, for some players, its most disorienting quality. The courier has no personality when you start the game. They have no history, no expressed opinions, no preferences that have been decided for them. They are a vessel for the player's imagination and choices, which means they are as fully realized or as empty as the player makes them. The game has mechanisms for building the courier's identity over time. The trait system, available at character creation, allows you to select behavioral tendencies that shape how others perceive your character and how the world responds to them. The perk system, which grants new abilities as you level, allows a gradual definition of what kind of person the courier is becoming. Someone who talks their way through problems, someone who fights everything they meet, someone who sneaks through the dark, someone who builds things, someone who breaks them. The dialogue system, with its skill checks and its faction awareness, creates an implicit biography. A high-speech courier, who has been negotiating and persuading since the start of the game, has, by the time they reach the endgame, developed a specific relationship to language and conflict that is different from the relationship of a high-guns courier, who has been shooting through most of the same situations. The two characters have lived different lives in the sim world, and their choices at the end carry different emotional weights because of those lives. This is character building through action rather than through explicit backstory, and it is one of the things that the Western RPG tradition does better than most narrative forms. The courier's identity is not told to you. It accumulates from what you do. Every choice is a character choice. Every path through the Mojave is part of who the courier is. The courier's backstory, in the main game, is deliberately minimal. There are hints, certain dialogue options, certain reactions from NPCs who seem to know them, certain environmental details that suggest a history, but nothing conclusive. The game keeps the space open so that the player's imagination can fill it, but the DLC, particularly Lonesome Road, fills part of that space with specific content. The courier had a history with the Divide, made a delivery that had consequences, was connected to the events that shaped the wasteland's current state, in ways they didn't know when the game began. This retroactive backstory is a risky design choice, and it works because it is handled carefully. Ulysses's accusations, which form the emotional spine of Lonesome Road, are specific enough to carry weight but framed in a way that doesn't contradict the player's imagination of their courier. He is telling you about something you did. He is not telling you who you are. The distinction matters. The 6 possible origins at the start of the game, the 6 different courier backgrounds that each provide different starting skills and a different framing for the character, are one of the game's least discussed design decisions and one of its most thoughtful. Your courier can be a former soldier, a gambler, a drifter, an explosives worker, a farmer, or a street kid. These backgrounds provide skill bonuses and a brief orientation, and they are never mentioned again unless you choose to bring them up in conversation. They are seeds for imagination, nothing more. But they are specific seeds, and players who chose a background and then tried to live inside it, who played their gambler courier as a gambler throughout, or their soldier courier as a veteran, found that the game's choices resonated differently when filtered through that identity. The courier is, by the end of the game, a person who has changed the Mojave. The slides that play at the end tell you what happened to every faction, every settlement, every companion, and the through line in all of them is this happened because of what the courier did. The scale of influence is extraordinary, and the game is honest about both its exhilarating and its terrible aspects. You change things. Some of the changes are good, some are not. All of them were yours. This is the deepest thing New Vegas does with its central figure. It does not tell you that you are a hero. It does not tell you that you are a villain. It tells you that you were someone, that you made choices, and that the choices mattered. The Mojave was one way before you walked through it. It is another way now. Whether that's better or worse depends on what you did, and the game is clear that what you did was genuinely up to you. The courier doesn't have a face on the cover of the game. They don't have a canonical name, or a canonical gender, or a canonical voice. They are defined entirely by the player who plays them, and this is a kind of intimacy that very few narrative forms can offer. The courier is the player's imprint on the Fallout universe, the trace of a specific person's choices on a specific world, as individual as a signature. Section 16. Closing the distance. Reflections on a long walk through the Mojave. We have covered a great deal of ground tonight, and we are approaching the end of the road. But before we stop, I want to sit with the game one more time, not with any specific fact or development story or design decision, but with the thing that underlies all of those, the feeling. There is a feeling that Fallout, New Vegas produces, specifically, that I have not encountered in quite the same form anywhere else. It is the feeling of a world that is both broken and inhabited, ruined and lived in, post-catastrophe and pre-whatever comes next. The Mojave is not a wasteland in the sense of a place from which all life and meaning has been stripped. It is a place where life and meaning are being reasserted, imperfectly and against enormous resistance, by people with insufficient resources and conflicting visions and the specific human stubbornness that refuses to accept the idea that this is how it ends. The NCR soldiers who complain about their pay and worry about their families back in California are trying to maintain something. The Legion's brutality is, in the Legion's own understanding, the price of a civilization that won't fall apart, worth paying because the alternative is worse. Mr. House is building towards something, even if the something is built on the labor of people who didn't consent to it. Even the powder gangers, escaping from a failed prison system with very few options, are people trying to survive in a world that keeps narrowing their choices. This is the quality of New Vegas that makes it feel different from games where enemies are simply targets and landscapes are simply obstacles. The Mojave is full of people, and the people are full of reasons, and the reasons are complicated, and the game trusts you to engage with the complexity rather than reducing it to a set of win conditions. The courier, walking the highway from Good Springs to Vegas, encounters all of this. Every stretch of road has a story. Every ruin has evidence of whoever was there before. Every person you meet is dealing with something that predates your arrival and will continue after your departure. The game does not flatter the player with the sense that the world is waiting for them to arrive and fix it. The world is already in motion. You are a factor in it. Not the only one. This particular quality, the sense of a world that has its own momentum, its own prior history, its own ongoing concerns that the player intersects rather than initiates, is what mature fiction does. And it is rare in video games, not because game makers don't understand it, but because it is genuinely difficult to execute. It requires enormous amounts of content, of which New Vegas has an unusual amount. It requires writers who understand that the world's minor characters are not minor in the world itself, only in the player's experience of it, and who write them accordingly. It requires a philosophy of design that treats the player's agency as significant without making it total. New Vegas does all of this, and it does it in 18 months, with a budget that would have been considered modest for a game of its ambitions, with a team that was tired and running and not entirely certain they were going to make it to the finish line. The game they made is imperfect. It shipped with bugs that took months to patch. Its frame rate on certain platforms was a recurring embarrassment. It had rough edges that more time and money would have smoothed. None of that changes what it is. The imperfections are part of it at this point, part of its history, part of the story of how it was made, part of the reason it belongs to the tradition of Black Isle, rather than the tradition of games that emerge from unlimited time and unlimited budgets and are smooth and polished and somehow less alive for it. There is a Joshua tree somewhere in the Mojave, and it has been growing for 200 years, slow and strange and shaped by the wind, and it will be there in 200 more if the conditions allow. That is what certain games become, permanent. Not static, not frozen in time, but present in the ongoing life of the medium, still growing as new players discover them and old players return, still producing new conversations and new analyses and new mods and new ways of seeing what they contain. Fallout, New Vegas is one of those. The Mojave will be there when you close your eyes tonight. The lights of the strip will be visible from a long way off, orange and red and blue against a dark sky. The radio will be playing something good. The desert will be cool and quiet and full of stars, and the road will stretch out ahead, straight and long, and going somewhere worth going. You have been walking it all night. Rest now. You've earned it. If you made it this far, you already know what this channel is about. Long nights, deep dives, the kind of content that's built for the hours when the world goes quiet. If that's your thing, and clearly it is, subscribe. Hit the bell if you want to know when the next one lands. And wherever you are in the world right now, whatever time it is, I hope you found something worth staying awake for, or something worth drifting off to. Good night from the Mojave. Section 17, The Creatures of the Mojave, An Ecology of the End of the World. Every world has its wildlife, and the wildlife of the Mojave wasteland is one of New Vegas's more underappreciated achievements. The animals, mutants, and constructed creatures that populate the desert are not simply encounter tables. They are the ecological consequences of 200 years of radiation and mutation and abandonment, and their presence in specific places tells you something about those places. Let's start with the rad scorpions, because they are everywhere and most players stop noticing them after the first few hours, and they deserve more attention than they receive. The rad scorpion is a giant scorpion mutated by prolonged radiation exposure, and it is one of the most ecologically plausible creatures in the game. Real scorpions are remarkably radiation resistant. Studies of scorpion populations near nuclear test sites of BZAs have found that they tolerate radiation levels that would kill most other organisms. The rad scorpion is, in a sense, what a scorpion might actually become if the conditions of the Fallout universe were real: larger, more aggressive, more numerous, because the radiation that killed everything else barely touched them. The cazadores, the giant, aggressive, venomous wasps that appear in the mid-game Mojave, and that most players remember with a specific, vivid frustration, are native to the New Vegas region in a way that distinguishes them from many other Fallout creatures. They are the result of experiments at the RepCon facility, specifically genetic modification carried out in the pursuit of a particular kind of biological weapon. And the Old World Blues DLC reveals that the Big MT's researchers were responsible for their existence. They escaped, as experimental animals in science fiction always do, and they colonized the Mojave's drier, hillier regions with an efficiency that suggests they found the environment very much to their liking. The Deathclaws are, by the time of New Vegas, a well-established apex predator of the wasteland ecosystem. Originally engineered as a military weapon, large, fast, massively strong, with claws capable of tearing through light armor, the Deathclaws escaped during the chaos of the Great War and have been spreading and adapting for 200 years. The Mojave's Deathclaw population has developed regional characteristics, and the game includes a conversation about Deathclaw behavior and ecology with a researcher near Sloan, the quarry town, that treats them as an animal worthy of scientific attention rather than simply a combat encounter. The quarry near Sloan is occupied by Deathclaws, and it is closed to the player, not because the game has made it inaccessible, but because the Deathclaws are genuinely too powerful to fight at low levels. This is the game's approach to ecology. Deathclaws are dangerous not because they are scripted to be dangerous, but because the numbers on their stat cards reflect what an apex predator of their size and aggression should be able to do to a human being. The feeling of the quarry as forbidden territory is earned rather than artificial. Geckos, giant radioactive lizards, occupy a different ecological niche, filling the role of medium-tier predators that hunt in groups and defend territory aggressively but are not the overwhelming threats that Deathclaws are. Their regional variants in New Vegas include fire geckos and golden geckos, whose different properties reflect different environmental pressures. The fire geckos in areas near volcanic activity or industrial heat have developed a tolerance for high temperatures and a defensive mechanism that involves spitting flame, which is either an evolved adaptation or a result of ingesting specific compounds in their environment. The game doesn't specify. It leaves the ecology open enough to be plausible. Night Stalkers are the game's most disturbing example of unnatural hybridization. Coyote-rattlesnake crosses that exist because someone thought this was a good idea to create. They are primarily nocturnal, which gives them the quality of things you hear before you see, and their attack pattern includes a venomous strike that applies a blinding effect. They hunt in small packs and use terrain in ways that suggest the cunning of their canine components, operating within the aggressive persistence of their serpentine ones. Finding a Night Stalker den during the day, when they are sheltering, is a different experience from encountering a pack at night when they are active. The same creatures, the same numbers, but the darkness and the tactical situation transformed by the time of encounter. The Mojave's humanoid mutants, the super mutants, the night kin, occupy the wasteland's upper ecology in a way that blurs the line between wildlife and people. The super mutants of New Vegas are not the organized military forces of the Master's Army that appear in Fallout 1, nor the relatively sophisticated communities seen in Fallout 3's DC Wasteland. They are, primarily, the remnants and descendants of a failed experiment, large and dangerous and possessed of varying degrees of intelligence, some forming small communities and others hunting in groups that are indistinguishable in behavior from large predatory animals. The Nightkin are a separate category, super mutants who were specifically trained for stealth operations and given stealth boys as standard equipment, with the result that long-term stealth boy use has produced schizophrenia and dissociation and a collection of behavioral abnormalities that make them unpredictable in ways that straight physical danger is not. The way Nightkin behave in New Vegas, paranoid, prone to hallucinations, sometimes conversational, and sometimes immediately violent without clear trigger, is a portrayal of psychosis that is handled with unusual care for a group of giant green mutant soldiers. The game's robots, the Securitrons, the Protectrons, the Robo-Scorpions, the Sentry Bots, represent a different kind of post-war ecology, the ecology of machines running on deteriorating hardware and increasingly outdated programming, trying to execute directives that may no longer make sense in the world as it is. A Protectron that has been guarding a factory for 200 years has been doing its job in a building that no longer has employees for a company that no longer exists, under conditions that were never anticipated by whoever wrote its programming. Its behavior is the behavior of a system functioning correctly within a context that has made correct functioning meaningless. The robots of the Mojave are, in this way, a meditation on the persistence of institutional logic past the point of relevance, which connects them thematically to the factions, to the NCR's bureaucratic inertia, to Caesar's Legion's imitation of an empire dead for 1,500 years, to Mr. House's centuries of patient waiting. The machines are doing what they were told. The humans are also, in different ways, doing what they were told. The question the game asks about both is, by whom and for what? And does that still apply? The weather of the Mojave creates microecologies across the landscape. The slightly wetter areas around the Colorado River support different vegetation and different wildlife than the driest portions of the interior. The mountainous regions have different thermal regimes than the valley floors. The game captures something of this in the way the creature population varies by region, in the way the plant life changes as you move from one part of the map to another, in the way the sound design shifts subtly with the terrain. All of these details, the specific ecological niches of the Mojave's creatures, the way the landscape shapes and is shaped by the things that live in it, the connection between environment and the animals it produces, are part of what makes the Mojave feel like a place with its own internal logic, a world that exists when you're not looking at it, a desert that was here before the courier arrived and will be here after they leave. The world is full. The world is strange. The world is alive in ways that a real desert is alive. Not always comfortable, not always welcoming, but persistent in the specific, unhurried way that the natural world is persistent, continuing through catastrophe and adapting to it and going on. Take a breath. Let the Mojave be what it is, enormous and ancient, and full of things that glow in the dark, and howl at each other across impossible distances, under a sky so full of stars it seems impossible that so much beauty could survive in a world so thoroughly broken. It does, though. It always does. Section 18, The Long Walk Home, a final night in the Mojave. The road from Good Springs to New Vegas is about 40 miles as the crow flies, on foot, through the specific terrain of the Mojave, the switchbacks and the dry lake beds, and the stretches of cracked asphalt, and the sections where the road simply stops and you have to navigate by the shape of the hills. It is much longer. It might take days. It might take weeks, if the detours are extensive and the side quests are many. Most players who play New Vegas do not go directly to New Vegas. They wander. This is not an accident of bad game design or inattentive world building. It is the intended experience, and the wandering is where the game lives. The main quest is the spine, but the Mojave's life is in its ribs and its joints and the cartilage between, in the small towns and the distant beeps of unidentified locations appearing on the compass, in the strangers met on the road and the conversations that go longer than expected, in the moment you crested a hill and saw, for the first time, the lights of the strip on the horizon and felt something complicated about what they meant. It takes, on a thorough first playthrough, somewhere between 60 and 100 hours to see most of what the game contains. Some players have 300 hours in it, some have more. Each playthrough is different enough from the last. A different build, a different faction alignment, different companions, different choices at each juncture, that the game does not feel repeated, even when it is technically the same content. The Mojave keeps revealing itself to people who keep walking through it. This is the final thing to know about Fallout, New Vegas. It is a game about the value of the journey over the destination. The courier is trying to get to New Vegas. They spend most of their time not in New Vegas. And the things they find on the road, the people they meet, the stories they encounter, the choices they make in places that have no strategic significance but enormous human weight. These are the game. New Vegas, the city, is the frame. The desert is the painting. Every road in the Mojave goes somewhere worth going. Every ruin contains something worth finding. Every person you meet has a reason for being where they are. And if you ask them about it, they will usually tell you, and the telling will be worth your time. The Mojave is very large and very dark, and very quiet at this hour. The stars are doing what stars do, which is to say they are burning at enormous distances in complete indifference to whether anyone is watching. The wind is moving across the scrub, cold and gentle, the kind of wind that doesn't have a direction so much as a presence, the kind that makes you pull your collar up without consciously deciding to. Somewhere out there, a radio is playing. The signal is faint at this distance, but the voice is clear, smooth and warm, and entirely professional, reading the night's news with the same measured cheerfulness he would bring to the afternoon's news or the morning's news, as if the time of day doesn't change what the voice is for. Somewhere, Boone is at his post on top of the dinosaur, watching the desert through his scope. Somewhere, Veronica is reading by a fire she built herself, her power fist beside her in case the night produces a reason to use it. Somewhere, a group of powder gangers is arguing around a fire about something that will not matter tomorrow. Somewhere, in a tower of glass and steel, A very old man who is mostly not a man anymore is watching through a network of cameras, processing information, planning something that will take another decade at least. The Mojave has been here since before any of them. It will be here after. The desert has a way of persisting through things, through empires and wars and the specific catastrophe of the 21st century's last Tuesday. That is not hope exactly, because hope implies a preference. The desert doesn't prefer anything. It simply continues. There is something deeply restful about a world that continues without needing you to make it continue. The Mojave will be the Mojave tomorrow. The road will be there when you get up. The lights will be on at the Strip, and the NCR will still be arguing about logistics, and the Legion will still be east of the river, and Mr. House will still be waiting, and Big Iron will still be playing on some frequency of the wasteland's electromagnetic spectrum. That voice as clear and warm as it ever was. Sleep now. The Mojave will be here when you wake up. It always is.